And you look at things all the time, and yeah, you can say, well, now we're both so I just thought that stuff, you know. 25 when he were the teachers. She hasn't. They were like feeling that really was so it's funny really too. So what I did my kids and where do we get the and I get Sally in the home. But I like it because she's so fancy. That was like political. I get my life. I'll say she had. I think she was so fancy.
Yeah, I was not surprised. Yeah, so yeah, let's not print that. Yeah.
Thank you.
this, maybe it was the $7. The weekend before. They're ready to find another.
Yeah.
So they're. That we start. Yes.
Okay, that's wow.
Could we do something? Thinking because you have. Anyway,
This is.
There's a there too. Yeah, that's just, yes, this is. So when we're ready, and then just click this, ready, and then just, because it takes a second to register that. So I just was making sure that they can see, so they're up there, they're seeing the PowerPoint screen, which is what's shared there, and they can hear you, so I think we're okay, and this is off at the moment, sorry, but that's on, so it's, they can hear me. Would they say anything bad? She's sitting there. Thought I got
Yeah.
So that's what.
I'm gonna hurry up.
Yeah.
I brought my own pen. And it's. The other two were special. Yeah. Oh, you'll be busy. I got your. Summer. No. Years. No. Well, I'm here, but. I tried to get her. Yeah, Northern Library. The girls. Like first day. I know it's too late. Yeah. But I didn't know like. Especially like. We're on so much. Like we're on Florida during that time. Then
The Harry Potter thing. They're doing Harry Potter. Yeah. We're staying in the meeting. Actually, I don't think they But it's right before she started. Maybe like. We're working on. It's with. We went to Florida. Break. What part of Florida? Yeah, we're going, like I said, it's like I'm.
Yeah.
We're going to. Yeah, it was 12. Yeah, what I mean,
There you go. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being flexible in the start time tonight, and we've got lots of things to talk about, so I think we'll get started. First, I want to make sure we get our attendance as usual. For the committee, you've got the yellow sheet, please sign in, and for the visitors tonight, please print your name on here. I'm going to bring it around over to you and get it started, but please print your first and last name so that we can read it and include it in our notes for the next meeting. So give me just a minute. So we mentioned this last time, but just following along with the agenda here. We have Abby DeFreitas is, there she is. I did send out, when I sent your meeting materials out, I sent out the revised list of advisory committee members that included Abby in that. And so we're glad she's here with us. Moving on to agenda item 3, the committee meeting dates and locations. As we've said in the last couple of communications with the committee, we have a lot to cover tonight. We have Nick's here to update a little bit on some of the transportation questions that were asked for the last meeting. So we appreciate him taking some time to join us for that. So he'll be here in Alan's section. We're going to revisit some of the facilities questions that the committee raised last time, as well as the staffing information that we have. And lastly, it'll circle back to me to talk about the finances of it. And That's where the new material will conclude is with the finances. As we process through this, one of the things we'd like to ask the committee members to be thinking about is, as I said, there's a lot tonight. So how much, we don't know exactly how much time we're going to have left at the end for committee discussion, which, as Ellen and I have said all along, is really important to us, that we feel like we have that time to have those discussions and to do that processing of the materials. So as we progress through the evening, if you could maybe be thinking about, again, depending on the amount of time we have left at the end of this meeting, whether or not you would like to have an additional meeting before July 25th. And let me lay that out. So on July 25th, we will come to you with the draft of the study report that will be submitted to the State Education Department. And we will ask for, we will try to get that out. It will be 100 and some odd pages. We will try to get that out at least a week ahead so that you have the opportunity to read through it thoughtfully. We will then at that meeting kind of go through a few slides that summarize that work. None of that material will be new. All things that you've seen before throughout this process of meetings. And then we will take any comments you have, or any corrections or modifications that we all agree make sense. Ellen and I will go back, we will make them, and then typically by the end of that week, or certainly within a week of the meeting, we will have the draft report sent off to the State Education Department. That keeps us on the timeline that they've created and shared with this group from the get-go. So with that in mind, if the committee decides it would like to meet again, just to talk about everything that has been shared, any kind of lingering questions that you may have, then we really would be looking at probably July 18th or 19th. I think those are that's a Monday or Tuesday, where Ellen and I could be available to come down, not share any new material, and listen, essentially give you time to talk among yourselves, with us, ask any questions that you may have come up with in the meantime. And then that would give us a chance, before you see that final draft, we would have to turn it around very quickly, but it would give us a chance, if we needed to make modifications to that draft report. So I say that all to you now so that you can have that in your mind as we're going through the material tonight. Okay, questions on the process with that? Okay. If not, then I'm going to hand the ball off to Nick here, who Nick has heard the questions. Stay in front of the mic. Nick has heard the questions that came from the committee and some of the members of the audience last time, and he's going to talk a little bit about some of those things.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Just see a lot of familiar faces around here. I will introduce myself and preface this powwow with a couple of my qualifications. I'm Nick Malone, Executive Vice President of Roll Bus Company. Actually, as a kid, I attended both Rossville and Manor School, and the majority of the time I lived in Rossville and attended Manor School. After school, I would walk down to the bus garage and dispatch my friends home on some of their buses. So I'm familiar with the area, I'm familiar with the process. And I understand there was some concerns and confusion about how transportation would work at the last meeting. So I wanted to come and clear that up. Just to me, it's crystal clear. I spent the last 7 years actually servicing 3 schools that were just a few miles apart, that had operated in 6 different buildings, transporting over 3,000 students. In a given week, there were 14 different dismissal times on a Monday through Friday in the afternoon. 40% of those kids were on buses that were shared between the 3 schools, and the average speed of those buses was 7.4 miles per hour. Now, this was obviously in a different operating environment than we're here today. But it's just a little background to what is actually possible when you come up with a process and set rules. And we did all of that and accomplished a 1 hour ride time for those students at those different schools, and again, a shared service. So I think the one thing I wanted to make clear is that, I believe it's the committee's decision to really come up with these rules within reason, to agree upon them to move forward. I know there was some confusion between the single tier and the double tier. In my professional opinion, the single tier, the drop off of one school following another, is the absolute way to go. And also there could be a hybrid approach. I mean, I know the area, I'm very, very certain that, in a successful merger, there could certainly be buses that pick up at one building and just go home and drop off because the population is there. And there is no need to really, go out of the way and mix the two populations if it doesn't make sense. And that's really my last point, is that come up with these rules, come up with logical rules, and the transportation just needs to make sense. I cannot foresee a situation where we're picking a child up 3 miles away from Livingston Manor School, coming all the way out here to Rossville, dropping some elementary students off, and then heading back over to the Livingston Manor. And again, that's achieved by setting rules, agreeing upon those rules, being reasonable in setting those rules, and executing. It really would be a disservice to come up here and tell you what your ride time will be, what your specific pickup time will be, because things will change over the years, the populations will change, and so we don't want to really get into that this evening, but just a couple of options and tools for success to achieve this. And could be a reality for this district, and maybe not. It's something we do in other districts, is feeder buses. When you have some outlying students that may make your normal routes a little difficult, we would send out a feeder bus to kind of connect those students with a more populous route. Again, that's few and far between, but it is something that's done, standard practice. It doesn't sound, it's not as difficult as it sounds with a student getting on one bus and getting on another. That's really the last resort. The other thing is the flexible vehicle sizes. A lot of people don't know buses come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. I would imagine if successful in this merger, there would be more of the smaller vans, but they actually make those small vans pretty large, where you can have up to 30 students on the smaller vans, and that's an economic point. Where those vehicles are cheaper when you're talking about the budget. So, we would definitely be utilizing different vehicle sizes. And then the last thing is just transparency and fairness. Like I said, we establish these rules, we adhere to them, and then it's the operator's job, the bus company's job, and the district's job to put those parameters out and be transparent in doing so. So that's my short speech, and if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Nick, maybe if you could, one of the things, and you helped me work on the, let me get where the microphone is for the people watching us from home. You helped us develop the concept of maybe using shuttles as one option.
Yeah.
And helped me develop the cost around that. So when the committee sees the presentation tonight, it's going to contain those cost estimates. Nick has presented several other options that the district, a merged district, might consider. So I know I'm putting you on the spot a little bit.
Okay.
And you've already said single tier is what your recommendation would be, that it continues to be single tier, which is what it is now. So with that in mind, do you feel like the cost estimates that we have in there for a shuttle system would be adequate, even if it's decided not to use the shuttle system?
Yeah, I mean, because the shuttle is not a huge cost in the grand scheme of things. I believe the budget that we came up with was in kind of the current budgets, by about 90%. It can just be a little bit of efficiency between the two. And again, it's tough to go on record with a firm number, but yeah, I believe these numbers that we put out there are certainly accurate.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make sure the committee was aware that really when you see the financial picture tonight, and the transportation cost is a piece of that, what we're really doing is not setting in stone what process will be used. We're nowhere to that point yet. What we are doing is acknowledging that within a merged district, there may not, but maybe some additional transportation costs to get the kids all here efficiently and safely. So I don't want anybody to think that because they're seeing the shuttle numbers in the presentation on the finances, that means, okay, that's a done deal. That's the way it's going to be, because that's not the case at all. It's really a placeholder. Any other questions for Nick while we've got him hostage here?
So
Yeah, we've got Jessica here.
Sorry. So what you're saying is in a tier one, which is what you're recommending, it still can be sort of customized once it gets put into place. So an example would be, if you've got a Livingston Manor elementary student who assumably is going to be shuttled to Ross, if that Manor student is living on the line, that's closest probably to Roscoe, rather than be taken to Manor School to be put on a shuttle only to drive right past them home again on the way to Roscoe.
Absolutely.
That's something that can be looked at and changed to sort of fit that particular case.
Listen, at the end of the day, some buses are gonna have to stop at both schools, and we just replaced the shuttle concept with the fact that bus will make a drop at Roscoe and then go on that, what I estimate to be about a 10-minute journey to Livingston Manor, then yeah, absolutely. And again, that goes with my first, one of my first points is that it's just gotta make sense. And it's a much simpler to do that when you have full population and you're looking at the big picture rather than getting into individual situations and trying to figure out me, what's my time? Because those things could change. Like I said, in that scenario that I explained earlier, about all those schools and all those kids and all those different times. We were very careful to never give out, if you live here, this will be your ride time and your pickup time, because it might be the case for 2 years, but then populations change and shift and move and it becomes either a better situation or a worse situation for that family, which is why you focus on the rules and what's agreed upon that you can live with as a whole and as a group. So that way, no matter what happens to the population, you're always going to fall within the parameters that you all agree.
John Hannah.
So, yeah, to piggyback on some of the stuff that Nick was talking about, currently, the pickup parameters are based from the school building. In a merged district, those walking distances that we have now. So for example, if it's an elementary kid, and these were some of the questions that came up last time, is an elementary kid now, still gonna be expected to try and find a way to Roscoe if they're in the walking, all that stuff changes. So an elementary kid, if the elementary school is based out of Roscoe, even if he's currently a walker at Livingston Manor that lives in Hemlock Ridge, Hemlock Ridge will be a pickup spot for a bus that brings students over here. So that's part of the common sense stuff that Nick is talking about, and that him and I have had several conversations about this. It's basically putting rules in place that say no bus ride is going to be longer than X. And building the routes and the number of buses based on those rules and those parameters that become agreed upon. So, what we currently have in place could be replicated in the event of a merger. It's just going to look a little bit different.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
Lori had a question here.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure I'm clear on this. So if a child lives between the two buildings, there's not going to be backtracking, I guess is what I'm going to say. So say buses come in from the outer edges of the Livingston Manor District, they stop at the elementary school, they stop at the Livingston Manor School, they drop off the secondary kids, and then on their way toward Roscoe, say, they can stop at Hemlock Bridge, they can stop along Old Route 17, going toward.
Yeah, I don't think you want to be making pickups and drop-offs in between the school touches. So if you are fully loaded bus and you're dropping off, and now I may be, let me just confirm for my own purposes so I can answer the question better. The discussion right now is elementary, K through 6 here and 7 through 12 there with who's starting first?
TBD.
TBD. All right. So let's just say we're starting here first and then going to Manor. I don't want to drop kids off here and then make pickups on the way to Manor, because that's going to turn that 10 minutes into 20 minutes. And I don't think that that's the best option. Will there be any, I can't promise there won't be any crisscrossing or doubling back, but in the middle people, which I actually happen to live directly in between the two schools and was transported my whole life between the two. It's a smaller population. We're really more concerned. I'm not worried about the logistics characteristics of the kids in the middle. It's more about who lives on the far side of the Manor District, who's got to get to Roscoe and vice versa.
Yeah, just clarification. So when you're thinking of kids up, you're thinking of elementary and high school at the same time.
That's correct, yeah.
And are we saying that the school will be open at different times?
I don't think that's what, that was by to be determined comment. I don't,
So if it's-
we haven't got there yet.
It's coming from the banner,
Mhm.
and it has a lot of kids in. Drop off kids in banner that age group to stay there and just come here and drop off.
Yeah, I mean, it would, I mean, in my scenario that came up with in my head, knowing that there hasn't been agreed upon time, it would be, you know. What do I have here? A drop off, say in Roscoe at 7:45 and drop off in Livingston Manor at 7:55. Those could always ship together, it'd be 7:55 and 8:05, whatever the case may be. But yeah, I think through the one thing that you have to realize is. Not every bus, like I said, is going to go to both schools. There could be a population of kids so large and concentrated in the manner that a van picks up those elements. Brings them straight to Roscoe with no high schoolers on board. There could be a kid that lives, that is gonna end up in a situation that's gonna be on one of the high school buses. That, yeah, those are the ones that we need to troubleshoot and figure out how to get that child to Roscoe. You know, instead of going all the way down Route 17, with one or two, elementary students to then come back to Manor with a busload of students. Is there a way to drop those high schoolers off first and then let that bus continue on to Roscoe? And that's all gonna be, and I don't know what the early drop-off rules will be, but again, it's just gotta make sense. And the fortunate thing is, these schools are 30 minutes apart, so I would imagine with the, any start time of school between 7:45 and 8:05, whatever the ultimate decision is. There's gotta be, at least the ability for, a student or two or 10 or 20, to be able to be dropped off, before the bell time to make the transportation make sense.
Right, and those are all the logistic things that, while we're talking about all of these things independently at different meetings. The reality of it is, in the event of a merger, all of these things have to be, overlaid over top of each other and worked out logistically to be successful. So there may, that the starting times in both buildings may factor into what transportation looks like, or what transportation looks like may affect what the starting times in the two buildings look like. So, all of those things are gonna have to be applied together to come up with, whatever the new entity looks like. And
Will
this,
see that prior to us voting on it?
Yeah.
there'll be recommendations.
Yeah.
So, and that's the other thing that goes back to, everything that this process involves is, what Alan and Deb do is they put together the possibilities of what things could look like. And, 9 times out of 10, when a merger occurs, the vast majority of those recommendations are implemented into the newly created district. It's not 100% of them every single time. It's the, those specific factors that are unique to the situation that are gonna cause, a few of those things maybe have to be tweaked. Is that okay with you?
Yes. Anyone else before we let Nick go? Okay, great.
That's it. Thank you, everybody.
Appreciate
Good
it.
luck.
One last piece of business before I hand it off to Alan. You all received the June 6th, I think it was, meeting minutes. Were there any corrections to those meeting notes that you wanted to highlight, Mitty? If not, and I'm thinking no, I'm gonna hand it off to Alan.
Thanks, Deb. Good evening, everyone. So I woke up this morning, got out of bed, got to my feet and felt like someone was sticking a knife in my head. So I am wobbling around a little. I've never had a twinge of a pain in my head, but this morning it was like I could hardly walk on it. So I'm hobbling around a little bit. Please excuse me, but if we decide to end the evening with a relay race, I'm probably gonna pass on that tonight. But I'll do the best I can to getting around. So my part tonight is to, let's see, make sure that this is real, okay? You know how to move this? I got that.
Yeah, the button on the side.
Sorry,
Button on the side.
moves it or turns it on?
Yep. That works.
Should.
Yeah, that's. Alan, Nick wants to add one thing
Okay,
about, relating to costs, involving transportation.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Alan. Just one thing, just to make sure that everybody understands, because in order to put everybody's minds at ease, I mean, obviously, and selfishly, more buses there are, shorter ride times, the easier transportation gets, but we understand that that balloons cost. But I just want to make sure that everybody understands transportation aid ratios with the state. And that if you're looking at, $1 million or let's say a $2 million transportation program, in a district or a merged district that is 90% state aided, that is not a $2 million cost to the district, it's a $200,000 cost to the district. So when you're looking at transportation numbers, understand aid ratio and state reimbursement, and let that, help you guidance.
And that's actually in one of the slides a little bit later on.
That put it in the slides, guys. In slides. Yep.
We get you that number on Thursday because we got to take this.
So, no, it wasn't.
surprising.
Very good.
Okay.
Yep.
That one and that.
Okay,
Touch the other stuff. It's bad.
okay. Got it. Thank you. Okay, so I'm starting to say, my role tonight is to talk about the staffing aspect of the study. You'll notice that this falls just before the discussion on finances. Because one of the things that we're going to learn tonight is that schools are very, very labor intensive organizations. Money that is spent in schools is not impactful for school supplies, for textbooks, for field trips, for uniforms. That's not it. Money in schools is spent on staff. It's not unusual for 70 to 75, sometimes even up to 80% of a school district budget is allocated towards salaries and benefits for the people who work in those schools. So that's a really important point to understand as we have this conversation. We're going to be talking about some pretty big numbers tonight, and the reason is that school expenses are largely involved with staffing. So let's start here. We're now into your handout. And what you see here is simply a listing of the positions and number of positions that each district has. And so you can look at those kind of quickly, but bottom line, you see that Livingston Manor has about 108 staff members, and Bresco has about 67 staff members. And as you look through those numbers, what you'll notice is that the big numbers really are at the top. The large majority of staff are teachers, teacher aides, teaching assistants, those people who are involved with providing direct instruction to students. That's where the big numbers are. Not surprising at all, but this gives you an idea of how many people are actually employed in a school district. And again, the vast majority are teaching staff and people that support teachers. The next thing that we looked at was a comparison of the labor contracts for teachers between the two school districts. Just by way of background, there are 700 school districts in New York State. Each one of those entities are separate school districts. They have their separate boards of education. They have their separate employees. And it's the responsibility of the district to negotiate labor contracts with unions in their school district. So the teachers always have a teacher. There's always a teacher contract in a district. There's always a contract that deals with the support staff, the custodians, the food service helpers, the secretarial staff. There may be a contract with administrators, or the administrators may be individually employed. But what we find as we look across these 700 school districts is that the state is structured in such a manner that every school district negotiates its own contract with its own teachers association. In this instance, that we're talking about. No two contracts across New York State school districts are ever exactly the same. And so what we've done here is to take a look at the teacher contracts in both Livingston Manor and Roscoe and say, as you look at the major items of the teacher contracts, are they really, really different, or are they fairly similar? And so knowing that they will never be the same, what you have in your handout is a look at that comparison between the two school districts. The contract item is the first column. Over here, then we've got Livingston Manor provisions, and then we've got Roscoe provisions on the right. You can see the duration of the contract. You can certainly go cell by cell and get a comparison. If you were to look at the first one, for example, probably the biggest issue on the first page is the health insurance. That's very costly fringe benefit item. And the question would be, how much does the district contribute toward the premiums for those health insurance programs? And what you find by looking at the health insurance programs, they're both pretty similar. As are most of those clauses on that slide. This finishes up. It didn't fit on one slide, so we went to another one. And here we're comparing again. You can see that both school districts have longevity payments, which I'm going to talk a little bit about later. You'll see that in here the workday, one workday is 7 hours and 5 minutes. One workday is 7 hours and 15 minutes. You can see that both districts have payments for people in terms of retirement benefits. Again, certainly didn't take every single clause out of the contract, but took the major ones and made a comparison. And what we find looking at these two slides is that the two contracts are different. Not surprising. We also find that the contracts are a lot more similar than they are different. There are differences, but the differences are not terribly significant. The question is, if there is a merger, could reasonable people be expected to sit down and negotiate a new contract for the newly merged school district, understanding that the current contracts are going to have an impact on what the merged district contract looks like? Again, if you take the time to go through these, if you were to take the time and go through line by line the contracts, again, you'll find they're different, but it doesn't appear that there are any major differences between the two contracts that could not be worked out. So our conclusion looking at these two slides is, if there's a merger, and one of the responsibilities of the new Board of Education will be to recognize a teacher bargaining unit to negotiate a contract with, and a new representative, a new union, in this case, a NYSET affiliation for both districts, to sit down and negotiate a contract. Would it be reasonable to assume you could do that? I think it could be. These two slides, I think, show that while there are differences, the similarities are really pretty significant. Should not be a major issue in terms of trying to move a contract forward. So the one place where there is a difference is when we look at the salary schedule for each of the two school districts. Salary schedules, again, in New York State are traditionally built on a grid system where teachers are hired in at a base salary, and those salaries over time increase basically for two reasons. Number one, teachers stay year after year after year, and each year the schedule on which teachers are paid increases. So teacher salaries go up because teachers have longevity in the district. And that impacts the salary. The second thing that impacts the teacher's salary is the acquisition of graduate course and acquiring of graduate credit hours, oftentimes supplemented by attaining a master's degree. So that structure is in place for most school districts in New York State, and it's really in place for the two school districts here, for Livingston Manor and for Roscoe. So we're going to talk about a starting salary and understand that the longer a teacher is here, the higher the teacher's salary is going to be. And the more graduate credits that a teacher has, the higher the teacher's salary is going to be. Those are the two factors generally that impact how teacher salary compensation is determined. So let's start with, so you understand what this is about. This first chunk of cells here talks about salaries for teachers who have a bachelor's degree and nothing beyond a bachelor's degree. So let's start. Steps refer to the number of years. So this first cell going left to right across the top, B, which is bachelor's, step 1, first year of experience. This is that teacher who has just graduated from college and is a first year teacher, hasn't taken any graduate courses, and they come to teach in their first year at Livingston Manor and in Roscoe. And you can see that two salaries, starting salaries right out of college in Livingston Manor and in Roscoe, 48.9 and 49.7. They're very close. They're very close. Yes, there are a few $100 difference. They are always going to be different, but it's not like one district is hiring at 35 and the other one's hiring at 45,000. These starting salaries really are pretty similar. By the time a teacher is taught for 5 years, they're required to get a master's degree, to have their permanent certification. And so another very common step for, especially for younger teachers, is to look at this next group of cells, which is the master's degree cell. This is when a teacher would have a master's degree. That's what the M stands for. And then the step again is the number of years of experience. A very common placement for a teacher would be to have a master's degree at the end of 5 years. And again, as you compare this cell here, you can see that somebody with a master's degree in Livingston Manor is making 57.8. Somebody with a master's degree in Roscoe is making 55.9. Again, different, but very close. And as you go through this schedule, you know, you can see that there are always going to be differences, but basically, you know, they're fairly close. Now, this is, again, these salaries are calculated by these base schedules, adding on when a teacher has additional years of service, has additional graduate hours of credit, added on when a teacher achieves a master's degree. That's how these positions and salaries get calculated. When you look at everything and put it all together, This slide shows you the average teacher salary for both school districts. And again, we take the teacher payroll, take the number of teachers, and these are the average salaries. The average salary for a teacher in Livingston Manor is 78, and the average teacher in Roscoe, the salary is about almost 73. So again, they're different, but again, they're fairly close. The thing that would tend to even ameliorate that difference even more is this column, which says that the average teacher in Livingston Manor is on step 15, has 15 years of experience, whereas the average teacher in Roscoe has 11 years of experience. So because the average teacher has 4 years less experience, you would expect that salary to be a little bit lower, because that's one of the factors that drives these numbers. So, when all is said and done, again, the salaries with the way that the two unions and the two districts have negotiated their contracts, they again come out to be fairly similar. We've done a bunch of these. These salaries are probably as similar as any two districts we've seen. It's frankly a little unusual that the salaries are as close as they are. I would guess that somebody in each district is kind of watching to see what's happening in the other district. And in the end, they turn out to be fairly similar. So, this then gets translated into a concept that's really important in terms of the analysis of the financial impact of this stuff. So right now, without going back to the exact numbers, a third grade teacher with a master's degree and 5 years experience in Livingston Manor might be making 56, and a third grade teacher in Roscoe with a master's degree and 5 years experience might be making 58. Very close, as we've said. They're not the same. And that's fine. That's the way it works in New York State. There's nothing wrong with that. It happens everywhere. And as long as the two districts are separate employers, those two teachers with exactly the same amount of experience and the same amount of graduate credit with a master's degree are making different salaries, and that's fine because they're two different employers. But the question is, if the districts decide to merge, now you have two third grade teachers working right next door to each other, both of whom have a master's degree, both of whom have 5 years experience, but now they're working for the same employer as the districts have merged, but they're making different salaries. What are we going to do about that? Is that okay? Or now that you're working for the same employer, the same school district, if you've got the same amount of experience and the same master's degree, shouldn't you be making the same salary? That's the question. So this whole examination of what happens when two salary schedules come together in a merged district, this process, this phenomenon is referred to as leveling up. The idea is that the two teachers have the exact same experience and the same master's degree that are $2,000 apart. Should we move the lower paid teacher up $2,000 so that now two third grade teachers working right next to each other, both of whom have a master's degree, both of whom have 5 years experience, both of whom now are working for the same school district. Now we've taken into account a calculation that says now they're making the same salary. That's the idea behind this concept of leveling up.
That's longevity, because if you look at the roster of the men, the longevity of those men.
Right.
Roster.
Right.
So maybe they're making less money there because their longevity.
Yeah. Right.
So is that true?
Yeah. Yeah, so that kind of takes me into the next question. If you got the concept of why it's okay for similar teachers to have different salaries now, but question whether they should have the same salary if they're worked for the same school district. If you got that leveling up concept, then the question is, how do we calculate what that difference would be? What I have done is that when we do estimates, we tend to estimate very conservatively. My guess is the estimate that I'm going to talk about is very much higher than it may in the end turn out to be, but we estimate conservatively. And what I did in trying to level people up is what I found is that sometimes Livingston Manor salaries are higher for a particular step and a particular graduate hour payment. And sometimes the Roscoe salaries are higher. These schedules are close, but they're hard to work with because usually one is just plain higher than the other one. And you just move all the teachers to the higher one. You can't do that here. So what I've done is I've created this base schedule up here. What this represents is the higher of the two district steps at every single step. Okay? Can't get more conservative than that. I've taken the higher step of every step. I then added $1,300 if a teacher's got a master's degree. I then added $90 per graduate hour for every graduate hour that a teacher has. And I took the longevity payment, which is the better of the two districts, depending on where you are, and added that in. So I kind of took the best pieces of everything, created this schedule and this way to compensate teachers. And then, depending on the individual teacher's years of experience, master's degree, graduate hour payment, longevity payment, I calculated teacher by teacher 90 times what the teacher's salary would be on this newly created schedule, as rich as it could be using either of the two districts as options. Okay, so that's the concept. Obviously, took some time. That's the concept.
There right now, just base.
That's just base.
$1,300 for master's, $90, and the higher longevity is calculated into the next slide.
Onto, yes, that all gets added. The individual teacher 90 times gets placed on this base salary based on the years of experience. And then I added in master's payment, graduate hour payments, longevity payments. So each teacher starts on this base, but they're all different because somebody's got 36 hours, somebody else has got 60 hours, somebody else has got 72 hours. Somebody's on step 21, somebody else on 23, somebody else on 24. It's kind of a mess when it started, actually. In the end, it turns out okay. But yes, that's what every teacher gets placed in at an individual salary calculator. So when that is done, here's where we end up. So what I did to begin with is that so at the beginning, the first line up here, right here, is the Livingston Manor payroll for 21-22. Teachers currently paid in Livingston Manor on the Livingston Manor schedule. You add up they have 55 teachers, you add up the salaries of those 55 teachers, and it goes up to 4.3 million. You do the same thing for the 35 teachers in Roscoe, their current salaries, it comes up to 2.5 million. You add those numbers together, the third line, the total payroll for both districts is $6,878,000. That's what it costs to pay the teacher salaries in both school districts. Now, if you go back to the previous slide, which is the enriched, leveled up salary schedule, and place all the Livingston Manor teachers on that schedule, then the payroll comes out to be 4.4 million. Down now at this next slide right here. The leveled up payroll for Roscoe is 2.6. For a total of 7.118 million on the leveled up salary schedule. The difference is $240,000 more that the teachers would be paid, given that calculation that I've gone over with you. And then we added in 30% for fringe benefit costs. We are using, as a fringe benefit calculation in this study, 55% of the average staff members' fringe benefit costs are 55% of the salary on average. We only use 30 here because while an increase in salary will increase Social Security, will increase payments to the teacher retirement system, will increase a lot of things. Health insurance costs is not dependent on anybody's salary. So we're ballparking the 25% of the costs of fringes is health insurance. So whether you're making 30,000, 40,000, 50 or 60, your health insurance costs are exactly the same. So we've taken that out. So we put in 30% of fringe benefits, which means bottom line, and that's this number. I said we were going to start talking about some bigger numbers. If you were to take the most conservative estimate, level up every teacher's salary in Livingston Manor and Ruston to a leveled up salary schedule that has the best of components from each district, and you were to implement that in year one of the merger, it's going to cost about $312,000 to do that. Now, there's no law that you have to level up teacher salaries or level up anybody's salaries. You don't have to do that by law. You don't have to do anything. If you decide to level up, there's no law that says you've got to do it in the first year. You might phase this in over a 5-year period and ameliorate those differences in salary 20% a year over 5 years, 33% over 3 years. I don't know what it is, but it doesn't have to be done in year one. Just emphasizing the point that this is a big number. Understand that. It's the number that would occur if everybody in the teacher bargaining unit was leveled up on my schedule from day one completely. How does it actually get done? It gets negotiated. The new Board of Education in the merged district will recognize a new teachers union. They will sit down and they will negotiate a new contract. The teachers union will ask for the best part of each of the two existing contracts. And the board, the district will do something different than that, something less than that. And their negotiations begins. And after 5, 6, 7 negotiating sessions, the parties will agree that here's the new contract for the newly merged school district. And this is how we're going to pay our teachers. Can't imagine it being probably this high, or certainly not higher. History has shown that it's not zero either. There is usually a leveling up that occurs when two school districts merge. Again, we believe it's prudent to include a number that should be part of the financial calculations of a merger. This is that number. So 300 grand to level the teachers up so that teachers with the same years of experience and the same graduate hours and the same degrees Now we're making the same salaries if you merge, 300 grand. Okay. Let me, just committee conceptually, you understand what I just taught? That makes sense? Anybody that doesn't understand, at least conceptually, what this represents?
See the teacher salaries, but why are the administrative salaries aren't presented in these numbers?
We haven't gotten there yet. Yeah, we looked at teachers, we looked at administrators, and I'm gonna show you something with support staff. But let me project. Remember, all staff, the big number of staff are teachers. No other group is going to come within 10% of this number, probably. This is really the big number, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But this is the number. This is the big one. Okay, so we got that as a, call that a liability, this business. Okay, there's a $300,000 liability. So now let's look on the other side. We talked about some efficiencies that might be realized should the districts decide to merge. And one of the efficiencies that we talked about at our second meeting was that there currently are 21 sections of elementary classrooms right here, 14 and 7, between Livingston Manor that has this arrangement, Roscoe has this arrangement, 21 teachers. Average class sizes, pretty small. What we said was that if you put all the elementary kids together, you could you come down to this chart, and instead of having 21 sections, you could do it with, is that a 4? It should be a 14 and 7. Oh, that's before. Did I get these numbers wrong? The far right column says. Oh, yes, sorry, thanks. Thank you. Yes, this is what it is currently. This chart is this right to here. And then in the merged district, instead of having 21 sections, there could be 17 sections. And class sizes are still very, very reasonable, even with the changes. The average teacher's salary with 55% fringe benefits is about $120,000. Okay, so to save 4 elementary positions, there's savings in a merger of 4 times $120,000 that we will talk about in a little more detail. But that's why that's an important number. Same thing at the secondary level. We talked about the number of sections that probably could be reduced at the secondary level, given the ability to combine enrollments in secondary classes. Again, I think we did it with no secondary class having more than 22 students in it. So again, we're not loading classes with 30, 35 kids. No class has more than 22 students in it, which is still pretty attractive. And probably in the English area, probably in the math area, probably somewhere else, we're saying that it's very probable that the efficiency that could be achieved at the secondary level could be 2 more positions, or a total of 6 teacher positions should the districts merge. Now, this is a really important slide. I have been very careful to talk about the reduction of teacher positions. That is different than the reduction of teachers. When the number of positions are reduced in a school district, there are a couple of ways to deal with having 17 elementary positions instead of 21. One way to deal with it is just say to 4 teachers, sorry, you don't have a job anymore. You're out. We're doing 17 in classrooms instead of 21. The other option is to use a phenomenon called attrition, which means that when positions become vacant, assuming they're the right position, they do not get filled, but people leave their positions voluntarily. They are 26 years old, they're getting married, and they're moving to Syracuse, and they resign. They have been teaching for 35 years, and they decide it's time to retire, and they voluntarily retire. 100 different things happen about why teachers leave. So what our recommendation is going to be in the study is that no staff member, now we're talking about teachers, no teacher would involuntarily lose their position, would lose their job. That would not happen. That these position savings, the savings that would be realized by reducing the positions would be done by attrition, and would only happen when a teacher decides to voluntarily leave. So that's the difference between losing a position and losing a job. No one, let me emphasize this, no one would lose a job at our recommendation involuntarily. But if you are looking to reduce 4 elementary positions, you do that as 4 elementary teachers resign. Now, the good news of that is nobody loses a job involuntarily. That's the good news. And that's important. We understand that, especially in a small community. We get that. We don't want that to happen. The other side of that is the savings that we're talking about may not all accrue in the first year. Okay. It may take 2 or 3 years for those 4 elementary teachers to turn over, to leave. So the savings may not be realized as quickly. That's the trade-off. We think it's worth that trade-off to ensure that no one loses a job involuntarily. So the next question then is, will teacher attrition work? Well, slide that you have up on the screen right now shows you the number of teachers for the last 4 years that have left these 2 districts. You can see, I don't have to explain it. I think it's pretty obvious what this is. You've got a variety of teachers in a variety of years. Bottom line, again, as you kind of digest what this is, you can see that between teachers and a couple of teaching assistants, Livingston Manor in 4 years has lost 16 teachers, and Roscoe in 4 years has lost 13. So 29 people have voluntarily left over the last 4 years. People leave these districts. In this economy, people leave every district. Everybody's having a tough time holding on to staff. So the concept of attrition, this says to us, is a workable one, understanding that not all of the savings we've identified may necessarily occur in year 1. But again, we think that's worth the trade-off of seeing positions come open and not have people involuntarily lose their positions. Okay. So let me keep going, then we'll do questions. This next slide takes a look at the administrative and supervisory positions. You can see where we are right now. And this table on this slide, this is a bit of an unusual situation because right off the bat, we have a superintendent who is shared between the 2 districts. That's rarely the case. Usually there's a big savings that occurs when you go from 2 superintendents to 1. When each district has their own superintendent, but that's not the case here. These 2 districts have already engaged in a lot of sharing. We've talked about it certainly with athletics, we're talking about it with staff, and certainly at the top with the superintendent is a shared position. Again, with 2 districts, there are 2 superintendent secretaries, there are 2 district clerks, because there are 2 boards of education, there are 2 employers. That's why there are 2 of those. You can see that there are a number of positions here that are shared. there also are some shares with Downsville. As we looked at this, the next slide had some conversations with Mr. Evans. We would project that it is probably possible to have some savings on this table as well. Number one, we would not need 2 secretaries to the superintendent or district clerks. We would not need the 2 cafeteria managers. We would have 1 cafeteria manager. And we would not need a payroll clerk that is in one of the district's budgets. Ballpark, $149,000 in savings with those 3 positions. Adding on the 55% fringe benefit costs, here's another savings of about ballpark $230,000. Will it necessarily all occur in the first year? Not necessarily. If the 2 cafeteria managers, one of them doesn't leave the first year, you wouldn't realize the savings because we believe this should be done by attrition also. 2 district clerks, if one of them doesn't leave, it might not be year 1. But the potential, again, could certainly be there. There will be some savings. This structure presumes that each of the buildings would have a principal and an assistant principal. And with the assistant principals taking over some of the responsibilities that are currently done kind of at the district level. We could get into more detail on that at the next meeting if you'd like, but certainly we see some savings there. I mentioned also that we took a look at the support staff contract. Both school districts have contracts with their support staff. Interestingly enough, Livingston Manor is affiliated with NYSUT, or the New York State United Teachers, while Roscoe is affiliated with CSEA, the Civil Service Employees Association. So they have different unions who represent them. Should there be a merger, there would be an election about who's going to represent this group of people. That takes care of itself. Again, you can certainly look at any of these cells, look at the vacation benefit, about 5 down, pretty similar. Look at the health insurance again, both in that 90% range of the district paying about 90% of the premium. Again, more similar than different, not the same, never will be the same, but pretty similar. Again, the question is, if there's a merger, could you expect that somebody could sit down and negotiate a support staff contract knowing that these are in place? Probably. They're pretty close. We then looked at these support staff salaries. Support staff salaries are really difficult. Number one, there are different civil service titles that most people have, that some people have. You can see we have a maintenance person in one district. We have a head custodian in another district. We have principal secretaries, and we have library clerks that we don't have in the other district. There are very few where the titles are the same. They're hard to compare. So here's what we've done. Where we estimated the savings of positions equaling 6 for teachers, 4 elementary and 2 secondary. We did not include any reductions in teaching assistants or teacher aides or any other support staff. I don't know how to calculate what leveling up for support staff would be when you have different titles and different duties. And the other reality is that in small school districts, people have a job title, but in small districts, everybody does what they have to do to get things moving down the road. Supervisors are workers. There are very few bosses who sit behind a desk. Everybody's a worker. So I don't know how to calculate what leveling up would be. So there's nothing in here that includes any leveling up. There's also nothing in here that includes any savings. And it's very possible that while there may be some agreement to level up some salaries, you get that. I think it's also very possible that there could be some savings of positions that we have not calculated in. In addition to that, go back to the first chart and realize we've got one person in the job, we got two people in the title, not like 55 teachers and 35 teachers. So even if there is some salary adjustment that's made with this group, our conclusion is that it is not so significant as to be included in the study because there are very few people for whom that would apply. And number two, we've planned no reductions in positions. So if there is some leveling up, there may well be some savings that would offset that. So to close the staffing piece, this is kind of where we end up with our numbers. You'll remember that to level up teacher salaries costs how much? To level up through teacher salaries, how much? 312 grand, right? So we got that on one side of the ledger. On the other side, we have 4 elementary teachers, salary and benefits, 118,000 each. 2 secondary teachers, salaries and benefits, and the 3 district office staff that we just talked about, the payroll clerk, the board clerk / superintendent secretary, and the cafeteria manager. That's another, with those salaries, that's another 230 grand. So bottom line, we think that staff efficiencies, nobody loses a job, no support staff reductions planned, no teacher aides out, no teaching assistants out, just these positions here. Conservatively, we believe that, 940,000 could be savings pretty easily if the school districts merged, savings by attrition. Now, from that, you're looking at the net, what Deb is going to talk about in a minute. You got 940 grand in savings, you got 300 grand in very liberal conservative leveling up costs. We're still about 640 grand to the good using those big numbers that we're now getting into because we're talking about people. Okay. So let me stop there for the committee. Did I talk too fast? You understand where we got the numbers, understand what it kind of means as we do further planning? Okay, well then, I just have one more slide, and this is moving away from the staffing piece. My last slide that I'm going to talk about is at the meeting last time when we talked about facilities. You'll know that you'll remember hopefully that our recommendation was that neither building is large enough to hold the entire merged school population. And so our recommendation is that the elementary school, pre-K through 6, would be located in Roscoe, about a 68,000 square foot building. And that the secondary program, probably 7 through 12, would be located in Livingston Manor, about 100,000 square foot building. So Manor, you got roughly 6 or 7 grade levels at each school. Secondary takes up more room than an elementary program with labs and kitchens and whatever music rooms that goes into a secondary program. So elementary in Roscoe, 68,000 square foot building. Secondary program in Livingston Manor, 100,000 square foot building. We then asked the committee if there are any other options we should be looking at. And the committee said, here's an option. Keep an elementary program in both buildings. Keep some elementary classrooms in Livingston Manor, some in Roscoe. Obvious advantage of that is that the youngest children would do the lesser amount of transportation, and you wouldn't be transporting Livingston Manor first graders from Livingston Manor to Roscoe. So I looked at that, and there's a couple of comments. There's no question the advantage of transportation is an advantage, no question about that. But on the other hand, when you continue to maintain 2 elementary schools, the almost $500,000 in elementary staff savings that we just discussed by reducing 4 teachers, you lose that because now you're spreading your kids across 2 buildings, which is what you have now. So those 4 teacher positions at the elementary level, each at about 120,000, it's almost $500,000 that you would lose by putting them in 2 buildings. Second, probably is not room in Livingston Manor to locate the elementary classrooms and the secondary program for both schools. There aren't enough rooms. And thirdly, and we had 2 people at the end of the last meeting come up and say, you know, it would be nice to have all the elementaries in 1 building. It'd be good for the students. It would be good for the staff to have the synergy that goes with the entire elementary program in 1 building, as far as sharing kids, sharing services, teachers working together. That synergy that you would get from having all elementary in 1 building would be lost. So those are 3 reasons we're not sure that we're not sure that the benefit of transportation outweighs those negatives. Second one, keep an elementary program in both buildings and put the 5-8 middle school here in Roscoe and then the 9-12 high school in Livingston Manor. Again, you lose the $500,000 savings from the 4 elementary positions. When you put the elementary program in 2 schools, you can't get past the fact that that costs almost $500,000 to do that. You have the synergy issues that we talked about. And number 3, there probably isn't room in Roscoe to locate. Well, you probably could get, if you had half of the elementaries, you might be able to squeeze them, but I don't think that's a great option either. The third option that was raised last time is, what about the possibility of building a brand new campus somewhere between the 2 villages? That would take care of a whole bunch of transportation issues. It is an option that if there is ever a time to look at a brand new facility, a 10-year period following a merger where the state will pay an enhanced amount of your cost, there's no better time than to do it right after a merger. So this is also an idea that is equally uncomfortable for a whole bunch of people to even have this conversation. I would say, I get it, but this is the time to at least have the conversation. So there are advantages, brand new facility, location kind of accommodating more kids somewhere in the middle, favorable state participation in paying for this brand new building. The architects have ballparked, your architects have ballparked $74 million as the cost of the brand new facility, including the acquisition of some property, including all of the building structure, including all the site work that would go on to putting parking lots and water systems and everything else that has to go into site work, as well as athletic facilities. So it's $74 million. There are some pluses. On the other hand, concern about what's going to happen to the 2 existing buildings if you build a brand new building halfway in between is an absolutely legitimate concern. Again, it's up to you to determine how attractive an option this is. It's our job to kind of let you know what the option looks like, and maybe some pluses and minuses. In the end, you're going to have to decide. But there's tradition that goes with any school building of this age in small communities that is absolutely real. And we would never try to talk you out of that emotion, that emotional attachment that you have to your building. We wouldn't do that. On the other hand, if you're ever going to do it, this is the time not to do it. This is the time to talk about it and figure out if this is right for you. Because if you're ever going to have the conversation, this is the best time to have the conversation. I don't care whether you do it or not, totally up to you. That's not our job. But it is our job to tell you that if there's any disposition towards doing something like this is the time to have the conversation about it. So that was the follow-up that came from last session's meeting on facilities that I promised I would follow up on, and those are kind of where I ended up. Want me to do questions of the committee now, or?
Yep, and then we'll do.
Okay, so committee, and by the way, anybody who's here is an observer, we will give you at the end of the meeting a chance to make comments and ask questions of us. If you would like to do that, do the committee during the meeting, and at the end, we'll ask you if you're interested. And Deb and I stay at the end if you want to one-on-one, but for right now, just the committee, yes.
Let's ask before, is there any savings as far as the administration? I mean, there's nothing listed on here. Maybe that's all.
We put that under. I wish I had my report with me. Okay. That the quote unquote administration would be slide 13. And what we pulled out of slide 13 as far as savings would be the secretary to the superintendent. And I understand these are not administration. Secretary to the superintendent, the two cafeteria managers, and the payroll clerk in Livingston Manor.
So we still need 4 administrators for this new school.
Yes. Are we missing something? Yeah, I mean, again, this is our look at it, so that's why you're here. If you think we're missing something, let us know, but that's the answer to the question.
I think what everyone's thinking is, I thought merging together was, I understand nobody wants to be eliminated, but merging is to save money. But if we're gonna merge and nothing's going to change, we still have the same administration, the same faculty, the same everything. How are we saving money? It's just the same.
Well, there's $941,000 in savings.
That's only if people leave. That's abstract. We don't know that. That's like.
Well, you don't know that. You have a pretty good idea they're going to because of the chart on attrition. You have a pretty good idea they're going to leave, but yes. So there's savings of $941,000. Okay. Okay. So are you saying that's not enough? But you can't say there's no savings because there's.
Right, we're saying that hypothetically, if we people leave, that's what we're saving.
Right,
Hypothetically,
right.
you know, our our district staff gonna leave, our 4 teachers, 6 teachers gonna leave, especially now with the recession happening and everything, are we paying these teachers to be in the school even though they're not having a position, just so that we don't eliminate them? And I believe that all the teachers did a great job, I'm not saying that, but we have to put it forward that this is hypothetical.
It's not binding from that perspective. However, I think it's somewhere between not binding and hypothetical. I think it's a little more than hypothetical. You'd have to go back to the second meeting. Remember where we listed? Well, the elementary, let me start with the elementary. Okay, this is based on actual enrollments in the classrooms in this school year. How many sections, how many kids? It's not hypothetical that if you merge, you can reduce 4 teachers. So that's real. Now, we don't know exactly whether it's going to happen in the first year, the second year, the third year, but over some period of time, because we know from this slide that people leave here. Average of almost 5 a year. So can we say all 4 of them are going to be gone year 1? We can't say that. But the reduction of 4 teachers, at the elementary, is based on data. The reduction of 2 secondary teachers is based on the numbers of sections and the kids in each section. So there's a basis for coming up with these 6 teacher numbers.
Actually, principals, being at the school committee merged with the teachers and principals, and the elementary, here you have 1 principal for the elementary. In the Mr. Mayor's school, you have, the system that, we don't see that on here anywhere. When it comes to the administration, we have the positions here, and what we have, but will there be a reduction in that as well?
There's that chart, the administrative chart, scroll from there.
Well, superintendent, let's start that. Okay, that's the first one, right? So there's savings there isn't in this case.
We already shared.
Right. So we're recommending that each building have a principal and an assistant principal. Elementary building and secondary building, an assistant, a principal and an assistant. Now, each building will have about 300 students. It's also recommended that the responsibilities of the director of technology and the director of special services / grants will be incorporated into the duties of these 4 positions. Okay, so what we're doing is taking the same people and putting more horsepower, if you will, at the building level. So I think we'd stay at 4 positions, but we'd have assistant principals or principals picking up those things that are currently some district office responsibilities. We would still have a full-time director of special services, a full-time director of athletics, physical education and health, and a full-time multimedia technician at the district office level, which does pick up, I think, the rest of those positions. And again, this is the detail that you will see in the report. So that's our thinking. So if that doesn't sound right, this is, let us know, but that's the thinking behind it. That's where we came up with those positions.
Yeah, I noticed, you gave the salaries of almost all the positions, but there's a lot of positions here that I really would like to see the salaries and see those costs too for the merged district, because, we have the principal, we have the athletic director. I mean, I think it's nice to see those costs at this point also in the whole scheme of things.
I think they'd be the same as they are now. There wouldn't be a difference. That's why they're not. Yeah.
And also we compared our salaries.
Well, again, there's right, they're all negotiated, but we're talking about 90 teachers compared with 1 or 2 media people, 1 or 2 technology director, 1 or 2 special services director. It's we did not go to that level of detail largely because of the numbers involved. Might there be 10 grand, 20 grand in leveling up for the support staff? Maybe. Might there be 10 or 20 grand leveling up in administrators? Maybe. Might there be a teacher aide that, leaves and is not replaced? Maybe. But those numbers are all so different than numbers like 312,000 or 941,000 that we have not gone to that level of detail.
Is it a full contract renegotiation for these labor agreements?
Yeah, essentially the 2 districts are dissolved and anything belonging to either of the districts becomes property of the new district, but you start from scratch. Now, having said that, certainly the existing contracts will have, everybody's going to know what they're getting currently, so it'll be a factor. But you don't start with either one, you start from scratch.
Follow up to that, and given any consideration to accelerating the negotiation of each contract by about 2 years. And keep in mind, we're all faced with CPI 8 or 9%, and at least the teachers in Livingston Manor have and they're 3 years into a 5-year contract, so we have higher expectations for salary increase.
We're at the same one.
I absolutely get the question. That makes a lot of sense. The reality of it is, from a legal standpoint, there is no school district. There is no Board of Education to recognize an employee bargaining unit, to recognize a bargaining agent with whom to negotiate a contract. I mean, I think you can have people sit down and you can say, if this were to come, what would we like it to look like? But I'm not sure. I'd let John comment, and I'm not sure how that would be.
Negotiated contract, it's different than having a lot of years.
Yeah, absolutely. That, and that's in the report. I mean, what I write in the report is, you know, the fact that other districts have leveled up. No one has approached this question, given the current economy that we're living in. That's in the report. And you're absolutely right. This economy is not conducive to making huge changes. I get that, but I don't know. I wish we had that number. I mean, that would make things a whole lot easier. Everybody would say, well, we've locked it in. We got not only what the number could be, but what the number is. I just don't know how you do that. You want to comment, John?
Legally, I don't think anything can start unless.
Right. Right. I mean, said another way, I would think the $941,000 in savings is, if anything, on the low side. And I would say the $312,000 leveling up cost of entities on the high side. Much beyond that, I would have. Oh,
I think one thing to mention, if you go back to the slide where it showed the number of people that have left through attrition over the last couple of years, it's not just retirements. Every year we have people at every level of the organization that leave and take a job someplace else. And correct me if I'm wrong, that same scenario would hold true to if, let's say, a teacher leaves to take a position in another district, gets married, moves away, all of that stuff. It's not filling that position then that the savings becomes realized.
Right.
Not necessarily waiting for 4 teachers to retire.
right. If the merger is effective July 1, 23, and Miss Jones resigns July of 24 to go get married, you didn't get that savings, that $118,000 in savings from Miss Jones that first year. Understand that. That's the trade-off for not putting people out of jobs involuntarily. That's a value, you know, that's what we're thinking. You may say, you know, given this economy, you know, we can't be as benevolent as we might have been in the past if we, I don't know, but that's where we would be.
When you looked at the staff analysis, do you recall how many teachers were in the 25 to 30 year range?
Roscoe had 6, I think. I think Roscoe had 6.
I think it's 8 to 10 on the Manor side.
It was maybe Manor. Yeah, no, I don't remember.
So I guess back to the question that Nancy had asked and Lily was talking about is, you know, the reality of it is, just in the last 4 years, there's been 29 position turnovers between the 2 districts. So while it may not happen immediately, within the likelihood of, you know, 4 or 5 years, there's a very good chance that those positions that have been slated to not be refilled when people move around, will happen sooner rather than later.
I think another way to look at it too is and I realize they're subject area specific, it doesn't always align, but in 2021, there were 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 10 in 1 year. And in the smallest year of 2020, there appears to be 4. So year by year, the numbers are pretty close to what you'd be looking at.
And again, the other thing that isn't in here, if we're talking about 4 elementary teachers. If 1 or 2 of those elementary classrooms has an aide, and an aide resigns, and it's one of those 4 classes, there's another position you wouldn't fill. We haven't calculated that savings in here either. That might be greater than that. Yes.
So back in the 94 study, there was a contingency clause in the attrition, when it talked about attrition. That contingency said in that 94 study that if attrition wasn't accomplished within a 4-year time period, that there would be cuts.
Not unheard of. I would say not all that typical, but that's the idea. I mean, that is a middle ground between the conversation we're having. We want to be assured that we save the money on the one hand. On the other hand, we don't want anybody to be put out of a job. Well, that's a kind of a middle ground. We're not going to put anybody out of a job, but at some point, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, yeah, at that point, yes, then we will. I understand that. It's an option.
I wasn't giving the idea.
When you looked at, maybe I'm asking this a different way, but at administrative and staff salary, forget the individuals, but just total salary expense, benefits versus teacher salary and benefits as a percentage between the 2 schools, were they approximately equal?
I didn't do that.
Because a sheer number of individuals might not matter in a sense.
If you think as a committee that would be worthwhile, I could do that. I have not done. What we really look at is what are the differences going to be? That was calculated into what we had, but we didn't do it. What else? Great.
Yeah.
How about a break? Ready for a break? Yep. And I'll be here in 10 minutes. 12 minutes.
I'll be back.
Okay.
Oh, that's okay to do that?
Yeah.
It'll go. Yes.
We stop. Okay, folks, if we could work our way back and reconvene, we'll forge ahead. As you're working your way back to the table, thank you to the committee members who asked some questions and have given us a couple things to follow up on. That's exactly the kind of feedback that we need. So I think one of the things that you've heard us say throughout this study, whether it's about program, whether it's about staffing, whether it's about facilities, is we're really looking for, are these two districts compatible? Are there more similarities than differences? Are they so vastly different that it doesn't make sense to even talk about a merger, whether it's the will of the communities or not? And the same really can be said for finance. So I think you'll see through the finance section that we've taken a lot of things that we've talked about in the other chapters and really begun to build, put them all together and build the pieces into that final piece, which is the finance. Because, I mean, quite honestly, if it doesn't make fiscal sense, it's no matter how good it is for kids or what the other reasons may be, if some of the one or the other of the communities would be harmed financially, that the taxpayers might have to pay more, it's probably going to stop the whole discussion. So that's why we take a look at these various factors. So moving forward with that. First slide, and this is something that the State Education Department also asked that we look at, is what has the community support been for the school district budgets? And you can see, and you're going to hear me say throughout the next hour or so, that the two districts are far more similar than they are different. And that couldn't be more clear than if you look at the support that each community has had from its voters. In the 11 years that we looked at, neither district chose, their boards did not choose to exceed the tax cap. That's what the column that says no. The first column shows, we're using this up. See if I can work this. What's the bottom one? This column here just shows the percent of the tax levy increase. Here's Livingston Manor, Here's Roscoe, same columns. Next column shows, did the district choose to exceed the state identified tax cap? In all cases, in all years, the answer is no. The next column shows the approval percentage. Livingston Manor ranges from 52.1 to mid-80s. Roscoe, very similar story. I think the low here was 66.4, and in 2020 exceeded 88%. And in all cases, all years, the budgets were passed on the first try. So this shows that there is a high level of community support for the school districts in these two communities. The next thing that we look at is the June 30th, 2021. That is the last completed fiscal year. We look at the balance sheet for the two districts. This is something that the auditors will prepare, and both districts have had their audits complete at this point. We're not asking you to become accountants and CPAs here instantly, but keep in mind, we're looking for similarities and differences. So as we work our way through here, you'll see that Livingston Manor and Roscoe, both they're reasonable numbers around the asset side. The liabilities, the things that the district owes or is responsible for in some way. Again, quite similar. Livingston Manor being the larger of the two districts, it would make sense that their numbers are proportionately slightly bigger than Roscoe's. So there's nothing here that is extraordinary in any way. The one thing that I've noted here, and what I've done through here, is to help you a little bit with the takeaways and to try to help you focus on some of the financial things that may not be your strong suit. It may not be your favorite thing to talk about. So in each slide, most slides, I've tried to put kind of those highlights of the takeaways from the slides. One thing here that you'll note is that as far as just cash, available cash in hand, Livingston Manor has more cash here on this first line than Roscoe does. This is a second half of the balance sheet, as with one of Alan's slides. Balance sheet does not fit on one slide. So this part of the balance sheet for the two districts is all about fund balance. You see right here, it's where it starts. There's 4 different kinds of fund balance. Fund balance is the savings, for lack of a better term. We'll delve into that a little bit more deeply in the next few slides. But here are the takeaways. And again, I'll define these things for you in a little bit more detail, but I wanted to start by first showing you the total picture. So if we kind of use those bullets to guide us, Livingston Manor has more funded reserves. Reserves, another name for restricted fund balance, right here. This chunk right here. Okay. Both districts use assigned fund balance. Again, I'll define it for you in a minute right here. To help stabilize the tax levy. That's the purpose of that fund balance on the assigned fund. Both districts have a decent amount, we'll call it, of unassigned fund balance. There is a state prescribed limit to that. At this moment, both districts have exceed that limit. That is not the end of the world. Many small districts, in fact, do exceed that unassigned fund balance limit. It's in part a function of the size of the school district. A percentage of smaller numbers yields, a small dollar figure that may or may not be deemed sufficient as far as having available funds. So remember, and this is assigned fund balance here. Remember that when school districts develop their budgets, budgets are estimates, just like your budget at home is an estimate. So they are projecting what they anticipate spending. In some lines, they may spend a little bit more because some additional, like something broke and they had to be repaired, or some other additional expenses cropped up. Conversely, there will be lines in which they have been conservative in their estimates, and there's a little bit more money left over at the end of the year. That money that's left over really is what becomes this assigned fund balance down here. And they can choose to use that, an amount of that for this, appropriation for the taxes. The last thing on this, the last piece is this unassigned fund balance that I mentioned. If, again, you liken this to your budget at home, some of you may have either in reality have it or in your head have it. That's going to be emergency fund. So should something break, that is a fairly large piece of equipment, you know, some of the mechanical systems of the building, things like that. The district, the state has said, district, it makes sense for you to retain a certain percentage. And that's that kind of emergency fund that is really an undesignated amount. The cap on this, the state cap I mentioned a minute ago, on this unassigned fund balance is 4% of the next year's budget total. Okay. So again, these are the takeaways over here. The one that I did not yet mention is this last bullet, where it's clear here that the Livingston Manor unassigned fund balance is currently larger than Roscoe. So remember, this is a 1-year picture. This is a picture of the 2021 school year. And these numbers here within the fund balance, as other entries in the balance sheet, will change year to year, depending on a variety of circumstances specific to that district. So this was what I had mentioned a minute ago, that we will look a little bit harder at the various fund balances. So the restricted fund balance that you saw on that balance sheet a minute ago, you may have heard school districts talk about their reserves. That's what the restricted fund balance is reserve accounts. So there are specific rules that are spelled out in statute about the creation of reserve accounts. Can the Board of Education create a reserve, or does it need voter approval? It's usually one or the other. Can funds be spent out of the reserve by board authorization, or does it take voter approval? Can the reserve be funded? So once it's created, can you put additional funds in there with just board action, or does it take voter approval? So there are specific rules around each of these that are defined in law. So what you can see here is that both districts have been very fiscally responsible in identifying monies and putting those monies into reserve funds that are for specific purposes, as you can see by the name of the reserve, for expenses related to workers' compensation, unemployment costs, reserve for a teacher's retirement contribution, reserve for the employee retirement system contribution, repair reserve related to not capital project things. These are repairs that are needed but are not part of a capital project, where there's a bond issue and borrowing and voter referendums and all of the things that go along with that. There is a reserve for employee benefits and accrued liability. Monies can be earmarked as people separate service, those attrition folks that Alan was just talking about. When they leave, many times they're owed vacation or sick leave buyouts and things like that. There's money here that can be used for that you would not typically budget for, because you don't know what's on people's minds. You don't know if they're planning to retire or leave the district service. And then lastly, both districts have a capital reserve fund, which is intended to help support the local share of any capital project that either district may decide to undertake. So as I said here, there are very specific rules for them. You can't just randomly decide you need a few extra bucks. You're going to go in here, grab money out of one of these reserves and go about your business. It doesn't work that way. So all of the reserves, whether they're right now Livingston Manors or right now Roscoe's, in a merged district, it would all get lumped into one pot. It would stay in that reserve, but it would become one workers' compensation reserve, one unemployment reserve. The district-specific identity would go away. It would be, as with a lot of things, it would be one. And I think another important note here is the last bullet that's on the screen up there is if the district, the merged district, decided it wanted to undertake a capital project. And Alan talked a little bit about and I think we talked at the facilities section last time about the enhanced building aid that is available to districts that have merged. So, and it becomes, as he just said, it's the time to talk about some of these capital projects. There would be over $5.7 million available to the merged district to help cover the local cost of a capital project. Because that's the purpose of a capital reserve. Both districts have established that. Okay. So that's the last part of the reserve, or the fund balance discussion. If you would correct on your copies, this is my typo. So yours say 2021 BOCES budget in the heading. It's not, it's 21-22. So if you please save my embarrassment about that and make that correction. And we have, as you can see, we've already provided the corrected version that will go out on the website when it's posted. So one of the things that you're going to see in the future slides, we begin to talk about what are some of the efficiencies that a district may, a merged district may be able to realize. And you'll see in there, there's some of those things are BOCES services. So we take just a minute here on this slide to look at the BOCES budget that Livingston Manor has and that Roscoe has. These are the general categories. These are right straight out of your 21-22 operating budget that the voters approved for this soon to be ended fiscal year. Remember, these are budget numbers, so that's not the final dollars, but it will be very close to that. This just gives you an idea. Again, if we're looking for the similarities and differences, you'll see that many times there's only two things that differ in the type of services that the two districts are purchasing from BOCES. Certainly the numbers aspect, the number of students, where Livingston Manor has more students, it would be reasonable to expect that their costs for the instructionally related services such as, see, right, where did they go? Certainly right here, there's more kids, so likely students with disabilities, there's going to be more of them, likely just a function of math. And so that number is greater here. Looking for the there it is, the occupational education line or the career tech ed line. This is the state education department terminology. So again, because Livingston Manor has more kids, they're sending probably a few more kids to BOCES for those services. So the footnote here with the bullets, that both districts do belong to the same BOCES. That's always helpful from a consistency standpoint in reviewing this. Livingston Manor has an aid ratio of 54.1%. Roscoe's is 49.4%. So a word about that. BOCES is one of those expenditures to BOCES drives state aid. It's a category within the big state aid bucket. And you don't get aided for BOCES costs unless you spend money at BOCES. So that is what I mean by an expense-driven aid. So in this case, with Livingston Manor, the aid ratio is 54.1%. So in theory, this is not what happens in reality, and I'll get to that in a minute. Of the cost for BOCES, 54.1% of that would come back in aid to Livingston Manor. Same concept with Roscoe, take the expense, 49.4% would come back to the district in aid. You have to spend the money to get the aid back. However, it is important to remember in my 17 years at BOCES, I spent many reminding school business officials and other administrators that not every dollar you spend with BOCES generates BOCES aid. So it is not as simple as taking that percentage and applying it to this budget number that you see up here. There are certain things that are part of a very complex formula for determining what state BOCES aid is, where not every dollar of expenditure is aided. So I'm not going to get into the weeds with that, but I think that is important for you to know that you can't simply do that math and apply the percentage and say, oh, we're going to get those dollars back. It's not that simple, and it's less than that. Okay. So fund balance is a very important part of determining the fiscal health of a district. This takes that section of the balance sheet that you saw for June 30th of 21, and looks at the same data, but now for the last 5 years for which we have audited financial statements. What you will find here is that these are two very fiscally healthy districts. So as members of the communities here, both the school community and the actual community, that's a very nice, reassuring position for you to be in. The leadership in the districts over time have done a very good job of paying attention to these things and being prudent in the way in which they manage the money. A couple of things I wanted to point out down in the bullets that the 2019-20 school year is really an anomaly because of COVID. That was the year where in the spring, schools closed. So that created a very different dynamic with the amount of expenditures that were expended versus what would typically be expended if school were running in full operation. So in all districts across New York State, that influenced their money, their fund balance, their money's left over at the end of the year. In some cases, in very large ways. The other thing that I wrote in my notes here is how many times I used the word both when I was doing these bullets. Both districts have steadily increasing total fund balance. That's a good thing. Both districts have exceeded the unassigned fund balance limit. Okay, there's going to be an audit comment about that likely. But it means that it's not zero either, that you have money in this emergency fund, if you will, for lack of a better term. Both districts have used assigned fund balance to help reduce the tax burden to its communities. They've realized, they've recognized and identified funds that are left over at the end of a fiscal year, and then have said, okay, we're going to take those funds, apply it to the subsequent year's tax levy, and bring that down a little bit. Okay, so that's a good thing. Both districts have chosen to do that. The thing with that one has to be cautious of is if there's big swings in that number. That's something that's not really a red flag, but perhaps a yellow flag, and something to be paying attention to, because where that will become a problem is if it's typically there and then it's not. That puts the district in a situation where it has two choices. Figure out how it's going to get more revenue to plug that gap, or to reduce expenditures by a commensurate level, or some combination of these two things. But either way, if it's real high and then it continues to drop until it's very low or nothing, that often at best is a bump in the road for districts, but can be an early indicator of some challenges down the road. But I don't see evidence of that in either of these two districts. And last thing, we mentioned it earlier, at this point, Livingston Manor has more money in restricted and unassigned fund balance accounts than does Roscoe. Okay, so next piece. One of the things I want to say to you is, as we look at this, honestly, I'm not going to spend a lot of time delving into every dollar in this slide. In fact, Alan has on occasion said, do we really need to talk about this? How important really is this? But I include it for really for the purpose of illustrating to you that, once again, we're going to find that the two districts are more similar than different. So what this is approved operating expenses. That's not total expenses. That's not your total budget. That's not your total expenditures. None of those things. It's actual expenditures. However, it does not include the things that you see in the first bullet right here. So if you go and expect to see some of these numbers in your budget, you won't. It's a somewhat artificial number that the state education department uses. It's a factor in their state aid calculation. So the approved operating expense, or AOE, does not include transportation, capital construction, and some BOCES expenses. So the takeaways from this slide, again, is that the districts really are very similar. If you look at these numbers, and it's a little bit hard to read on this slide, but you have the full page slides in front of you. The differences are usually $1,000, a couple $1,000. And remember, this is a per student operating expense per student. So the other piece, the other factor here is enrollment. So expenses are fluctuating as they typically do, but so is enrollment. So this is not just all about the expense dollars. So what you see here, the best way as I was writing down my thoughts on this slide is that you see differences of a couple $1,000 year to year. One's higher than the other's higher, and it bounces around a little bit. But it's not differences of $10,000 or $12,000 or $20,000, which you might see in comparing two districts. So generally, again, very similar data here for the districts. Next piece of the puzzle here as we begin to look at the financial side is the state aid. State aid is a significant revenue stream for the two districts. The two pieces of this slide show the total state aid the districts received in the identified years, and then the total state aid without building aid. And the reason that those of us in business, school business administration talk about this is because the building aid is directly related to capital construction and the outstanding debt that a school district has. So that's the thing that can fluctuate a lot. Doesn't really give you a solid picture of year-to-year trends and that kind of thing in state aid. So we tend to take that out of the mix when to get a good solid picture of state aid. Yes, you get the dollars. Here, you get these dollars, but this shows you how much of these dollars are building aid dollars related to capital construction. So you can see generally here, it's fluctuated a little bit. It dropped down here, but now it's bounced back up again. Roscoe has been even more steady, fluctuations year to year, up and down. You know, the state budget process every year, there's discussion about how much aid the school districts are going to get. So they're tinkering with those formula, and there's changes, but this gives you an idea of there's a lot of dollars that districts receive from state aid, which is further illustrated here. So we talk about total revenue sources. So we look at this district by district here, and then we look at the combined district. So Livingston Manor right here, if you look at the average, that's probably the most telling number on here. So we can say that the federal dollars received from the federal government in these years. Now, mind you, with some of the funds related to the pandemic that districts are receiving, that number may change in a lot of districts if you were to look at the years moving forward. But for these years, the monies received from the federal government really are inconsequential in the discussion. And then you look at, for Livingston Manor, they get 42.6% from the state, which leaves 51%, give or take, for the local community residents to fund for the district. So local dollars are tax dollars. Tax dollars, interest earnings are like about this much now, but predominantly tax dollars. Same thing with Roscoe. Roscoe is in the state size and using the state's formula, a little bit wealthier. So its share from the state is smaller. And so the state funds about 35%. The local funding is about 65%. And when you combine the two districts and look at them as if they were one, historically here, down here at this last piece of the slide, state is about, well, is 40% right on the money, the average over those 5 years. Local, we'll call it 60%. So it's a 40% state funding, looking at the two districts in total, 60% local funding. Significant monies from the state, yet more so funded locally than from the state. Okay. So. Questions, I'm gonna shift gears slightly, so I'm gonna pause just a second for questions, I guess, kind of technical questions. Do you understand the concepts of what I've gone over so far? I'm going to move over into now a little bit on the property tax calculation process. I'm not going to teach you how to calculate property tax, I promise. So far, we're good, right? Ready? Okay. We will keep plugging along then. So what you're going to see here is that all of these things are building toward, as I said earlier, building toward trying to illustrate with the assumptions that we've made along the way, what the fiscal impact would be on the taxpayers of your two districts. If the merger, as I said, if the merger results in one district paying more than the other, once we get all the way to the very end of this, probably the discussion stops. Because no one is going to ask a district to pay more than it already is. So this is why we work our way through this process. So factors used in the kind of factors used in calculating the property tax rates. We're going to start with the full property value. Okay, this is not, emphasize not, what you see on your tax bill when you get it at home about the value of your property. Okay, that is the assessed value, where your assessors, however that occurs in your districts, will identify what they believe the assessed value of it, of your property is. It's done town by town. These two districts each have multiple towns within their district boundaries. Okay, so the only way that we can compare two districts is to actually go through a process to calculate what the full value, full property value is for the properties in your district. And the way we do that is to apply the equalization rate. I'm sorry for the technical terms that may or may not be familiar to you, but that is a rate that's established by the state, not the district, not the assessor, but by the state, given to the district. And the district is told, okay, this is the factor that you apply to the assessment for, brought my detail sheet that I didn't share with you. It's the way I calculated all this stuff. You know, this is the assessment rate for the town of Andes. This is the assessment rate for the town of California. This is, and so on. Okay, so we have to apply that rate to the assessed value of each of the property in the district. So where we get to when we do this, and by the way, when I looked at your two districts and the assessment of equalization rates for your two districts, it took me back to my time in the 90s where I was in a district for 10 years that had a huge range of equalization rates that are very much like the range I saw in these districts. When you look at the two districts combined, it ranged from an equalization rate of just under 3% to 100%. So that's something you're all aware of, I'm sure, but maybe not, because maybe you only know the town that you live in. But anyway, what we're seeing here is that property values are generally increasing, full value. So this is the theoretical full value of the properties in the two districts. So if you look at Manor, it's gone up every year here, okay? Roscoe has bounced a little bit here in 1920. You all probably know why that may have happened better than I, but that dropped, but now it's climbed back up again. So things So the property values, as we would expect, are generally increased in both districts. Nothing unusual there at all. Again, more similar than different. Okay, this is property tax levy. So one of the things that is a factor in calculating your tax rate is that the property value we just talked about. The next thing that I want to mention is the property tax levy. Levy is the entire amount that the school district asks the voters to raise in its budget. So, you know, it may go and say, we need $8 million. That's the levy amount. That's not how much each individual will pay. And it is a factor in calculating that. So we look at the property tax levy. This is a number you all would have seen when the budget materials come out from Manor, from Roscoe, and said, all right, here's what we're projecting to spend. Here's how we're projecting to fund those expenditures. One of those funding sources being the property tax levy. So if we look at this, incremental increases for Manor each year, pretty much mirrored exactly in Roscoe with incremental increases. If you think way back to that slide, very first slide that I started with the budget votes, it showed those levy increases, the percentages that again were very similar in the two districts. These are the dollars that drove those percentages. One of the things that when I was working in the districts as a business official, I used to talk about is I used to remind the voters and the community members that there's three pieces to property tax rate calculations, only one of which is controlled by the district. The property values are not controlled by the district. That's done by the assessment. Equalization rates that I just mentioned are done through the state. The levy is, the property tax levy is really the only piece of that puzzle that the district has control over. So that's just something I always like to point out to groups that don't live and breathe this every year. In general, both districts are averaging 2 to 3% annual levy increase, not tax rate, levy. Okay. Everybody clear so far? Ready with me? Okay, awesome. All right. Stop and see where I was here. So now we begin to look at the rate. This is the dollars per thousand that that is applied to the property value. So you'll notice the word true here. That's an important word. Once again, if you go home and you pull out your tax bill that you paid, the last one you paid, you're going to say, shoot, she's absolutely crazy. It does not say this number on my tax bill. No, it doesn't. Because again, this is a calculated number so that we can compare. This is not the tax rate per $1,000 of assessed value, which is what your tax bill at home will reflect. Okay, so we have gone back and used the true value that we calculated several slides ago, and now are able to compare on equal footing district to district. So you'll see with Manor, in 5 years ago, it was 1697. It's dropped, well, it popped a little there, but generally it's dropped down each year. A variety of factors play into that. So tax rate on true, what that says to me at a very high level, 30,000 foot look at this, that the property value is increasing at a rate greater than the levy. Okay, for the district. Roscoe has bounced more. It dropped, then it spiked up, but now it's coming back down. Again, not uncommon. If you think about what happened here, if you remember what I said to you a couple slides ago, and I said, not quite sure, you'll know better than I do why their full value may have dropped there. You'll see, it's a function right here of that. It's really not a function of dramatic levy increases. Okay, so you understand that. And then I took this combined, we start to now look at these numbers for the two districts, should they be combined. So this factors in nothing. It's nothing of the savings that Alan talked about, nothing of any additional aid, none of that. This is just if the two districts combined as they sit today and calculated tax rates with the numbers they use for their own budgets, this is what the tax rate on True would look like. So what you're seeing here is that it's less than Livingston Manor and it's more than Roscoe. And of course, you know, somebody's going, why in the world would we even have this conversation? Well, there's more to the story, so bear with me. So just, I guess, a footnote that I included here. So if you were to look at the assessed tax rates in these same years for Livingston Manor, for example, well, in 21, 22, the actual rate on the tax bill for assessed ranged anywhere from $15.71 up to $530.65, all a function of that equalization rate. Okay, so questions around that whole property tax piece, because I'm going to shift gears once more on you. Okay, awesome. Capital project, debt. Have to tell you, I've not seen one that looks like this before. Livingston Manor currently does not have any capital project debt, any payments owed, any mortgage, if you will, to use a layperson term. It is, however, receiving building aid payments in this amount over, well, I started at beginning with this upcoming year with 22, 23, because this year is really completed at this point. So I got the data from the district's financial planner. This is the amount in aid that the state is paying to Livingston Manor through 2033. And that aid is paid on a schedule that the state identifies. So while the district is done with its debt service payment, the aid was spread out over a greater period of time. So the Livingston Manor will be receiving aid in this amount until it is done at this point. Okay. Roscoe looks a little bit different, but honestly, I have to say, Alan's done way more of these studies than I have, but of the one, I don't know, 5 or 6, I think now. This is the lowest amount of combined debt service that I have seen. So while Roscoe has some mortgage payments here, they have principal, they have interest. It's very low, it's relatively low. I know these look like big numbers perhaps, but speaking and comparing to other districts, this is a very low amount of outstanding debt. And it's done. 2029 is the last payment of this current debt right here. Roscoe is getting this amount of building aid paid each year over here. And similarly to Manor, in 2030, the last payment comes from the state in a year in which Roscoe has no debt to pay off. They're done, paid it all. Okay. Questions on that? It's a wonderful position for these two districts to be in with regard to outstanding debt. As you think about what life might look like as a merged district. One piece we touched on here, I want to bring back forward again, that I think Ellen mentioned when we talked about the facilities pieces and potential building. I've just shared the data on the building aid ratios. The state defines what those building aid ratios are. There is a wealth factor here. So once again, Roscoe appears wealthier than Livingston Manor in the state's formula that it uses. So the key piece here with these two districts particularly, because you really don't have any old debt still lingering, is this last line. The Livingston Manor building aid ratio, 68.8%, Roscoe's 51.9%. Pretty significant dollars still that the state is providing to the two districts for any capital project work. Going through these bullets quickly, we just said that Manor has the higher of the two building aid ratios. Both districts have a very small debt load. We talked about that. Roscoe has this outstanding debt from the previous slide of 1.8 million. That's the combined principal and interest. And Manor has none. So I've never written this on the slide before, trust me. The merged district would actually be receiving an income from the state of $1.8 million net. That's after factoring in the expense for Roscoe, it still owes. And then the building aid is coming in for both districts. There's actually revenue of $1.8 million relating to capital project work. It was actually kind of strange reading it. It felt like I'd done something wrong, but that's what it shows. So now we start to talk about incentive operating aid. And there's, people have this loose concept of, oh, if we merge, the state's gonna give us some money. And that's generally true. And there's structures around all of that. The state believes, the reason the state gives the money is, I think, for a couple of reasons. The state believes that fewer districts would be more operationally efficient and be able to provide more opportunities for students over time. So they feel that this money helps incentivize, just like its name, districts to think about merging. The other piece, I believe, is that the state also recognizes there are some upfront costs to merging. While there's savings, and if we can't realize some savings, then we probably shouldn't even have these conversations. But there's also some things that cost money. Alan just talked about the leveling up costs. We talked a couple meetings ago about the transportation, potentially more transportation costs. Nick helped us understand that it's kind of to be determined, but there is the potential for additional costs related to transporting students. So for those reasons, the state has said, okay, for districts that merge, we are going to give you some additional aid over time. So this is in fact additional aid. That's a question that I get asked a lot. So is this, do they give us less other state aid because they're giving us incentive aid? The answer to that is no. This is over and above any other type of state aid that the districts receive. So let me ask myself a question before you do, because we get it every single time. Is the incentive operating aid guaranteed? And the answer is no, it's not guaranteed, just like none of the other state aids are guaranteed. However, SED, as I just mentioned a minute ago, SED believes there are operational efficiencies from districts combining. And they also realize that if they were ever in a position where they reneged on their incentive operating to districts that have made decisions based on that, that would, for all intents and purposes, and any further discussion about two districts merging if they feel that a stream could go away. I mean, Alan's worked more with the state education department in his previous role, but I mean, that's the gist of it, right? Okay, so no guarantees, but it would be highly, highly unlikely that that happened. So the way the the incentive operating aid works is that you'll see here, my bullets for you over here pretty much tell you what I'm going to, is that it is paid over 14 years. In the 15th year, it's done. That's it, it's done. Whatever year 15 is for a merged district, it is done. So the first years 1 through 5, this is a formula prescribed in law. Every year the budget process could change this. So far it hasn't. You'll probably wonder, is 2006-7 really right? Did you make another typo here? But no, that's really right. That's what it is. It's based on the 2006-7 operating aid for each district for in that particular year. You add them together. This is what this column here is about, combined 6-7 operating aid. And then you apply this percentage. So for the first 5 years, it's 40% of this combined operating aid. So this table is really all about just doing that. So years 1 through 5, a merged district would get an additional $755,927. That is the number. That number won't change because it's locked into that formula going back 15 or 20 years, whatever. Then from there, each year, that number decreases by 4%. So instead of in year 6, instead of getting 40%, you're going to get 36%. And then 32, and then 28, and so on, until, as I said, in year 15, it's finished. That's it. One of the things that we'll talk about in a minute is, so what do I do with all this money I'm gonna get? One of the things that you have, the district, merged district has to be very careful about is remembering that this will get to 0. And if there has been not sound long-range financial planning, there's going to be a hole to plug here that may prove troublesome, we'll say. The next slide really is simply a visual illustration of that. These are the actual Livingston Madawaska numbers of what incentive aid would look like for them. But this just shows you how it's flat and then it starts to gradually decline. Okay, so when Alan and I talk about mergers and do the merger studies and have these discussions, our general recommendation is that we think about the districts, the merged district, think about using this incentive operating aid in 3 relatively equal buckets. For the future discussion, you'll see in the projections I've done, we're going to use 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So we suggest the districts think about this as, whoops, it wasn't the pointer. Wrong tool here. 1/3 for long range fiscal stability. That's the kind of thing in the reserve funds, for example, that's a piece of long range fiscal stability. We think about program enhancements. And we think about how can we provide some relief to the taxpayers in our districts, our current districts. We're going to use 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 to illustrate what that might look like. But that's not a hard and fast number. It might be 40% for one of those areas, 30%, 30%. That's fine. What's not fine is if it looks like 80% in one area and 10% in the other 2. Because that will lead to problems over time. So for the remaining slides, we're going to use that 1/3. So here's the 1/3 piece where we're going to talk about program enhancements. So what might we do for the first few years with an additional $251,950? So remember, it's 1/3 of that 750 some odd thousand a couple slides ago. So this is program enhancements. Okay, so maybe we look at additional electives for our students. Maybe there's new or replacement equipment that we've been, we're into robotics and we want the latest and greatest things there that will benefit the students. Maybe we want more student support services. Maybe there's things around mental health challenges or something the districts want help with. New extracurricular activities, increased professional development opportunities for staff. That leveling up Ellen talked about a few minutes ago. That would be considered, I think, a program enhancement so that teachers are all on the same playing field. And whatever else you might imagine or need within your districts. That's that 1/3. The next 1/3 really focuses, as I just said, on the long range fiscal stability. You as a merged district would be starting from a really strong position because already the 2 individual districts have done a really solid job of being thoughtful about funding that restricted fund balance or reserves. This list here on the slide really is a list of the reserves that you already have. There's a couple others that are available to you to use that may or may not be helpful to a merged district, but what I would certainly say here is that if I were sitting in the business official seat in this merged district, this is not something I would entertain on my own in discussion with the superintendent. The 2 of us figure this out. You really need to use your financial advisor to help you work through this and to develop a strong long-range plan so that this district You know, we often get the question, or we've heard the story about after 15 years, we know District XYZ that merged and now all of a sudden they're in financial trouble and all of that. That can happen. If enough attention has not been paid to this kind of planning for that situation. And the last third. Whoops, jumped, I guess. Oh, no, that's right. My last third, this is the piece on tax rate, okay? So what I want you to know here is all this does on this slide is it takes, this is, now we're talking about the combined district. Remember, if you go back a couple of slides where we looked at the tax rate on full value from a few slides ago, if the two districts were combined, it was $15.33. So now what we've done is taken that number and now we've applied our operating aid to the combined levy right here. So the third column is the tax levy combined without the incentive operating aid. Over here, we've now added this incentive aid column. So it's this new number. So this, the incentive operating aid would get us to this number here of $15.08 in, I'm using current year data, realizing that we're really talking about a 2023-24 start date. But again, this really is about illustrating how it will affect the districts. So incentive operating aid only, not applying any savings yet, would bring this combined tax rate down by 25 cents or so, down to 15.08. And then what I've done here, this footnote where I've said I've assumed a 2% annual increase in both the on the levy here. So that's why this number goes up each year. And over here, why is this number going, why is the change going down each year? You're getting less incentive operating. Okay, remember, after the first 5 years, here we're sitting here right about the same number, but then it starts to dwindle down. So that the change is softened because you're getting less of the incentive operating. Okay, I'm good with that. Are we good? 3 buckets, generally equal use of incentive operating. Yes, please.
Thank you. Operating aid, like it says for the least amount of 1,414,000 and at Roscoe. And then,
Can you give me a slide number, Nancy, just so I can get with you on?
35.
Okay,
And then when we're talking about the,
that's operating aid, remember, that's not incentive aid.
okay, is the incentive aid through the state aid, is that?
It is another state aid stream. It's considered state aid. It is not. Your current state aid that you're receiving today is not affected by the incentive operating aid. The incentive operating aid is over and above the state aid. It's not a deduct, you know, they don't deduct it off one thing and then add it. So you net out to the same. That's not how it works.
So, just to clear, if we merge and we saw how it goes down as years go,
The incentive aid goes down. Yep.
we would still continue to get state.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
Is it, you have to use it in a certain amount of time, do they use it or lose it, you can.
It's not, no, it's not, you get that much a year. And it's how you choose to use it. It's not using it like it's not like a grant where you have to use it or lose it. It's not that kind of thing, but that goes back to let's plan appropriately. I mean, do we go out and spend all of our available monies in 1 year? The first year, maybe we don't, maybe we hold back a little bit and push some of that into the second year. Or maybe we have to use a little bit, maybe we didn't get the savings through attrition for year 1. So maybe we push a little bit more into year 1 and a little less in year 2 because we pick up a couple more positions via attrition, that kind of thing. But yeah, it's not a use of a lose. Any questions similarly to that? Those are all good questions. Okay. So let me flip back here. Oops, too far. Where am I? Efficiency, okay, 41. Oh, look, there I am. So this is just to give you an idea of, this isn't, I don't even know how to say this. These are possibilities, I guess we'll call it that. These are things that there's currently duplication of between the two districts. So there's Livingston Manor has these dollars budgeted for these various areas. Roscoe has dollars budgeted in many of those same areas. And then there's the total for the two districts. So what we've looked at, or just, kind of thrown a few educated darts at it, I guess, is some obvious areas in which there might be savings just from the efficiencies, the operational efficiencies of combining the two districts. So some obvious ones, auditing services. Right now, Livingston Manor has an annual audit, Roscoe has an annual audit. We don't need 2 audits anymore. When the district merges, we only need 1. So those kinds of things are reflected in that potential savings column. For the most part, I do not believe these are buys. Okay, these are contractual arrangements. These are supplies. These are materials. These are not people. Alan doesn't have an open staff. The important piece here with BOCES is what I mentioned to you earlier, is that a lot of these BOCES services, I tried to look at the ones that had a base fee attached to it. So in both my 17 years of BOCES, jargon is going to start to surface here. But many BOCES services start with a base fee that they charge the district regardless. All right. Manor, this is your base fee. Roscoe, this is your base fee for service A. And then you can add layers to it or not, depending on what your needs are. So I try to focus on those districts that are not student number driven or personnel staff, that staff do in service. It might be X dollars per staff number. So I tried to not look at those things too much and look at the obvious things where if there's 2 districts and now there's 1, instead of 2 base fees, there's going to be 1 base fee. There may be some mitigating, it may not be that clean because maybe a base fee has a sliding scale depending on district size, but you get the idea here. Those are the things I've tried to look at in this slide. And I've also been cognizant of the fact that if you reduce BOCES services and BOCES expense, you're also going to reduce BOCES aid, which is a revenue for the district. So there's nothing wrong with that. You just have to be mindful of it and identify it. And remember what I said to you earlier is that I gave you the BOCES aid ratios. You can do the math. It will not work because not every single dollar of BOCES expense generates BOCES aid. Okay, so there might be more than this. I've tried to, as Ellen and I have said many times throughout these meetings, we've tried to take a conservative approach. You might find far more efficiencies that could be realized from a merged district. You might choose to do fewer things. There may be some reasons why you don't want to look at reducing certain levels. But in general, this is a way to identify or begin to identify some of those operational efficiencies that we can look at. So that gets us to slide 42. And my slides are generally printed 2 on a page, except for this slide. So this really takes all of the moving parts that we've talked about so far and incorporates it into one summative slide. So let me take a minute on this one and walk you through the columns that you see here. So first and foremost, oops, right here, again, remember, this is not all of the incentive operating aid used here. We're only using 33%, that 1/3. So that's this. So this column is the year. Here's the 15 years that where incentive operating aid is generated, or 14 years, and then the last one. This next column shows you the 33%, 33.3% of incentive operating aid the district would generate. Okay, now remembering back a few meetings, you may recall Alan talking about the existing debt for either of the districts, in which in our case right now, we now know is just Roscoe. So the existing debt for either district is aided at the higher of the two building aid ratios, which in your case happens to be Manners. So that means there's going to be a little bit more building aid generated on Roscoe's existing debt. So that's what this means. Not big dollars, but still important. It's all important. Okay, so this overall is another 250 down here, this total, it's another $255,000 roughly. Okay, with me? All right, the next one. So this side of this gray bar, these are either additional revenues or reduced costs. So these are the pluses, I guess, if you will. So this one, the next column over, is the annual staff reduction in savings. So here's this 941,000 and change that Alan talked about, and I think we've all agreed that that number could be plus or minus a bit, depending on a whole host of things that you've all actually talked about and identified. But we're using that just for illustrative purposes here. And you can see at my footnote down here where these columns with an asterisk, we have assumed an annual increase of 2.5%. Might be 3, it might be 2, something like that. But recognizing that salaries will increase, costs will increase typically annually. So we have factored that into this whole discussion. So this plus, the next column says additional transportation aid. Well, that's the offset to the additional transportation costs that are over here. There, additional transportation costs. I've used, you know, we heard Nick say tonight that may or may not need that money, the additional money, but we're going to use the numbers that he provided in the beginning when we first started to talk about the shuttle configuration, and just acknowledge the fact that the transportation in a merged district may cost a little bit more than it does now. And to Nick's point that he wanted to make, and I promised him I'd bring it up, here's the cost, but here's the aid offset. These two districts with their wealth ratios are not quite at 90% that he talked about. They're slightly less than that. I think they're, I don't know, you can probably do that math. I think they're in the 80s somewhere, but it is not 90 because you're a little bit wealthier than those districts that max out at 90%. So this is the additional aid. This is the plus on this side. And then lastly, I took that budget efficiency sheet we just saw and added that in here. With that's also, I missed the asterisk on it. No, here. This is also factored in with that additional annual 2.5% increase. Right. So now on the flip side, these are the negatives, if you will. These are either lost revenue or additional costs. So we've got the lost BOCES aid we talked about with the efficiencies just a minute ago. Just talked about this additional transportation costs. And now here's your leveling up numbers that Alan spoke about earlier tonight, right here, with that annual factor in there. So when you add all these, subtract all these, you're going to end up with an annual savings, I'll call it, if you will, of just over $1 million. So the fact that this column is plus, that's what we're looking for to see if a merger would make sense for these two districts. Because if these loss in revenue or additional expense outweighs the side, what's the point? Okay, so in your case, that is not the case. It starts here, we're estimating just over $1 million with you know, corresponding increases over time. Questions on that slide, because that pretty much pulls everything into one spot. Great. Okay, so now I've taken that and, you know, start to get to, all right, now what, you know, the question that everybody wants to know is, all right, what's in it for me? You know, what does it mean for me? So to do that, we start to look at the tax rate, you know, the dollars per thousand. So We're still at this point, remember, using the full value, okay? Because that's the only way we can really combine and compare the two districts. So these are all numbers you've seen before. This is the combined full value of the districts. This is for illustrative purposes, using the 21-22 levy, knowing that this would really take effect in 23-24 in a merger. Here's this tax rate on true value. You've seen that number before. This is after, this is just the combining of the two districts. Then we take this line 1 from the table we just looked at of 1,052,093. So that's gonna be our savings. So we've taken this levy, we've subtracted this, that's gonna yield 13,507,660. So I need your help for a minute on this slide. There is a typo on the slide that I made and have fixed. If you look at Roscoe's 21-22 tax levy, the slide, the paper you have in front of you says 5,575,000. It should be 1,573,000. If you would make that edit, I would appreciate it. And the course, 2 more that correspond to that, obviously. This number says 561,000 on yours, should be 559. Which brings this to 507, not 509. Okay, so I appreciate your indulgence with that. Does not change this number here. So after applying this, what I'm calling the savings, the additional revenue, the savings, all those factors from slide 42, we get to $14.22 of tax rate per thousand on true value. Now compare it to where these two districts are today individually. All right, that's a good sign, because up until now, we had not been able to get Roscoe below where they were today, which is not where anybody from Roscoe would want to be. But now, with recognizing additional aid, the savings, the staffing modifications, it does get down to $14.22 per thousand of true value, not assessed. So one slide, I'm not sure if this has value or not, but we should share it. I think some people like to think about it this way. So if we looked at the two individual districts and said, all right, at its current rate, right here is Livingston Manor at 1571, tax on true. Roscoe 1476 at 2122's number. So if we were to merge, and if we were to take that $14.22 per thousand of true value, how long would it take? How long could we go before we get back to each, as a merged district, before we get back to each individual district's rate today? So you can see in Manor, because they start from a higher spot, it would take, I think the number, I think it's 7 years, yeah, 7 years to go past where they are now. And in Roscoe, the savings is not quite as significant, but it would still take 3 years to get up to that point. And we've assumed in this example, as I said in the bullet there, we've assumed that the a 2% increase each year in the levy to get there. So last slide with numbers on it. This is the question that Alan and I just added this slide actually 2 studies ago, I think, because it was really hard for the person who doesn't immerse themselves in this stuff around property tax levy to say, well, okay, that's all well and good. All right, so it makes sense. I can follow the math. But at the end of the day, what's it mean for me? So we've tried to give you the ability to figure that out individually to some degree by putting this slide together. So let me explain what this says. Now we're back to, this is assessed now, because true value, when it comes to what does it mean for me, true value is kind of useless, frankly. right? It's all about the town you live in and your equalization rates and all of that stuff. So what we've done here is we've taken this number should look familiar. It's the one I just had you correct. This is the number using a third of the incentive aid plus those additional savings we've identified. And said we need to levy 13,507,660. That's our newly merged district's tax levy. All right, so I then went back and took, again, this ugly looking sheet that you don't have, and used the actual taxable assessed values. This is the way the districts will figure your tax rates today. And I combined them. So for example, town of Andes is only in Manor. Callicoon is in both. Colchester, however you say it, is in both. And Rockland is in both. The others are one or the other. So, but I put them all together. So a merged district, whoops, where'd it go? A merged district would have, what is it, 9 towns. And this is the prorated share of each town's responsibility of the total levy. So suffice it to say, this is just the way in which a merged taxes would be calculated if a merged district existed. So in that merged district, Andy's rate unassessed, they're the only one at 100% equalization rate. Andy's rate would be 14.22. It ranges all over the place based on that equalization rate. With these two guys, Colchester and Neversink, exceeding 400. So now what I did was say, all right, this is right off there, straight up there, off the tax warrant for these two districts. So in 21-22, this is what somebody in Livingston Manor would have paid per 1,000 of assessed on their tax bill. And you can see how that compares to what it would have been in a merged district if the merged district existed in 21-22. This is the same information for Roscoe over here. Okay. That makes sense. I mean, so that's a slide. Hopefully, we had a lot of discussion with one of our committees that we work with about how can I make my neighbor understand this? I need to be able to give them something that's meaningful to them. We can talk hypothetically and all of that, but until and unless I can give them something meaningful that they can relate to, it's going to be a struggle to get them to understand. So that's the purpose of that slide is really just for comparative purposes. That's a lot of numbers, a lot of information. I get the feeling that the committee, you're kind of getting the gist of it, and we've had those check-in points along the way. So being mindful of the time, Ellen and I and John had a discussion. We feel like 9 o'clock is really as long as the committee can convene and stay together. That's in fairness to all of you, that's a lot tonight. And we will stay as long as we need to after that. But so I think shall we, Ellen, looking over at you, shall we give them some group processing time a little bit, or should we just take questions? What do you feel like? So we should just do questions. Okay, I see nodding, a lot of nodding, that's good. Committee, you've asked some as we've gone. We've made some notes with that feedback, particularly in the staffing questions. So other unanswered questions or clarification you'd like, or go over that one more time, or any of those kinds of things.
Are there any other big unfunded obligations that aren't included in here, like pension or post-retirement benefits, or anything else that would stand out between the two districts?
No, I think they're all factored into everything.
Yeah, the a couple of thoughts on that. The annual retirement contribution for the employees, the active employees, that's a budget line each year. Those kinds of things are exactly what the intent of some of those reserve funds that we looked at are for. There's reserve for the teachers' retirement payments that were, unexpected, unanticipated. Same thing for employees' retirement system. That's the only two systems that employees of school districts belong to. They belong to one or the other. And then I mentioned it briefly, but the employee benefits accrued liability reserve, the intent of that is so that districts really have no way of knowing, nor do employees often know exactly when they're going to retire. And the district has an obligation to pay whatever those contractual agreements are for those employees upon retirement or separation, or 12-month employees may have unused vacation days. They may have a payment for sick leave by contract that's unused and so on.
So, and back to Deb's earlier point, when you talked about financial advisors, that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that process of working with fiscal advisors, which is the financial advisors of both school districts use, those funding of reserves, that other 1/3, I think goes to exactly what you're asking for. As people retire and their sick day payouts, that MLR reserve that Deb just talked about, making sure that, having those financial people look at where everybody is, age-wise, what the potential liabilities could be, making sure that that reserve is funded healthy enough to account for X amount of people going every year. The ERS and the TRS reserves that we traditionally use year to year, making sure that they are funded adequately so as, the state aid fluctuates, the regular state aid fluctuates year to year. This past year is an anomaly, and I don't know how far back we want to go, but a very, very, very long time in which it was promised and delivered above what the expectations were. That has not always been the case. And having those ERS and TRS reserves to be able to account for a 9% to a 12% jump in those annual costs allows you to shift money from one of those reserves into your actual budget line and apply it to offset with the tax load.
As far as that, I'm thinking about, I mean, you raised a thought in my head I've not really talked about before, but it occurs to me that's important. I think if I were sitting in the seat, of a central administration role in a merged district, I think there's maybe 3 things that come to mind for me fiscally. I would engage the fiscal advisors, which are fiscal advisors. I would engage my actuarial firm that does the GASB. Was my 45 in my days, probably 54 and then some numbers now. And I would engage my CPA that did my annual audit. I think all of those parties have a different role that they can play and should play in this planning process.
I have a question. On the reserve funds, it says for Roscoe 0 in workers' compensation reserve, unemployment reserve, insurance reserve. I don't know a lot about this, but seeing that, are you able to move funds to those reserves in case you need the money in those reserves? Yeah,
So,
I mean, that looks a little
the
scary.
reserves. So one of the things that auditors like to see is your use of reserves. And like that said, this is a snapshot of the most recent audit. So the fact that some of those are 0, we don't always have unemployment liability. So that reserve over time has been funded based on a need or a projected need. So right now that 0 isn't a reserve that we've had a need for or had a need to use in several years. Therefore, the board hasn't allocated any additional monies into that specific reserve. Doesn't mean we can't at a future time, just there hasn't been a need for it. The same with the ERS and the TRS. We have gone back and forth. If you remember back, 5 or 6 years ago, where financially things were a lot more uncertain. State aid was fluctuated greatly. We heavily use those reserves. So anytime we had fund balance that was plugged into them and it was used in next year's budget. So from an audit standpoint, the auditors don't like to see it created as a reserve and stick stuff in there and never use it. So on the Roscoe side, since the need has arisen more often than in Livingston Manor, we funded them and used them annually from year to year.
I think there's, and actually, I think there's at least one reserve that I'm thinking of that I'm not sure these two districts have, that there is a statutory requirement, if it's not used at the end of 5 years, that it has to be dissolved and put back into, you know, taken out of the reserve, just put back into the general operating monies. And used in either as, you know, as assigned fund balance to reduce levy or something, but in fact, it's statutorily, there is a word, required that you dissolve it if you don't have need for it. Yeah,
I guess the short answer, zero isn't a bad thing.
right.
It's not a
Right.
thing that is on Roscoe's point, it's just.
It's right. It's exactly right. Zero is not a bad thing. It's because, the only reason it's there is because the other district had them and I was, you know, I wanted to identify all the reserves that either district had. Not a bad thing. If there's no need for it, then, you know, why tie the money there? But other committee questions? Okay, folks here in the audience, questions for any of the topics we've covered tonight that you'd like, as I said, like clarification or like to hear a little bit more about or follow-up questions? Or, yes.
I was just wondering, because I think Livingston and Martinsville staffing conundrum with a possible merger, because we just had our middle high school principal retire. So I realize obviously the vote hasn't taken place, but if we were to merge, it looks like both schools will have a principal and assistant principal. So Roscoe seems to be set up that way. But if we fill that vacancy with another principal, the merger goes through, we have two principals. Attrition was kind of factored into that position. I think maybe in 4 years, one of them would decide I'm going on my merry way, and maybe not. We don't have the salaries for that, so we don't know what kind of impact that is. Considering that, I wanted to figure it out. It's a lot of what ifs, but I just was wondering if you had thought about that at all in terms of filling that position.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that it's been very clear to me tonight is that we need to look at the administrative staffing again. I went back and looked at the data that we were given in terms of positions, and we don't have all the right data. I would say, give us till the next, if this again, let me get updated data and give you a better idea of what that would look like. Right there.
Anyone else? Stand over here in case I need to get off.
Back to transportation and with regard to, Rolling Mead, I know that currently Rolling Mead buses both school districts. Is it possible that they can provide the committee and the voters the bus routes as if districts were merged prior to the next meeting?
No,
Based on one tier?
that's short answer is no. There's too many, the routes are, and John, jump in if I go astray, because you know it far better than I, but the routes are typically established each year because kids come and kids go, seniors leave, incoming kindergartners, preschoolers all come in.
Yeah, I wouldn't ask them actually, maybe approximately, just so people have an idea.
I am not sure that's possible with your routes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the first scenario that they gave would be the most expensive possible transportation scenario.
That we used.
Yeah, correct.
From what Nick said tonight, yeah, I would agree with that.
So I think the numbers that they're using to show projected costs and savings are based on the worst case scenario for transportation. So I don't know how granular, like Deb said, every year our bus routes change slightly. As far as the stop, how many kids, the number of buses has fluctuated, whether it's a big bus, whether it's a small bus. You know, all of those things change year to year. And in my conversations with both Nick and Phil, without having the actual data of the combined district, it's extremely difficult and inaccurate on anything they could put together, you know, based on where we are right now. Is that?
Yeah, no, I would agree with all of that. I mean, I understand the desire to know that for sure. What I can say is typically, it's not something that's been available at this point in the merger study with any of the studies that we've done. The two districts have, when the merger has gone through, the two districts have a lot to say about that, and they get not just one or two people in the room, but several people that understand the districts, both instructionally, because it's all about, you know, somebody was talking about start times and those kinds of things in each building, that, you know, the instructional program start times. And then, you know, those tend to drive transportation, but then again, in this case, if it's a brand new district, as a merged district, then, you know, maybe there's some flexibility with that. So, you know, you need building principals as part of that discussion, I think. So it becomes, to do it well, I feel like there's a lot of folks that need a voice at that table. And John, correct me if you think, again, if you think I'm wrong about that, but, and meeting with the contractor, because, I mean, they know transportation and they know it really well. But that has to align with what your instructional program is trying to do and what the needs are within the buildings. And they're, I'm sure, going to be the first to say, all right, tell us what you need us to do, and we'll get it done.
And I think that's what Nick was trying to convey, is that we can build the parameters of, you know, no longer, bus rides is no longer than an hour, you know, and nobody walks more than X distance. And, you know, all of those things that are in places right now being reestablished for the new district, and then building what transportation looks like based on those parameters. So right now, I think we just telling me the longest bus ride in either district, and that's kid on the bus. It's not the time the bus leaves the garage to the time the bus comes back. But the longest ride times that we have right now is 1 hour and 5 minutes of a kid on the bus. And that's an average. You know, there are anomalies on the day when the weather's not so great, or, you know, there's different things that speed up or slow down, but the average worst case scenario ride time is 1 hour and 5. And what his thought was is building it so it's no more than 1 hour. And if that means, you know, utilizing that feeder bus system where it's a small van that, you know, goes up back Chandelier or up on the Norton Hill and grabs 3 kids and brings them down, and those kids get off that feeder bus and get on the big bus when it goes by. You know, those are the things that they're gonna look at. You know, back in the day when Roscoe had a lot of kids that lived on Rockland Road, one bus left the school, left the bus garage and went up and turned around at the Rockland house and came back and it was full. You know, so depending on where the kids exist is really going to depend on what the bus rides look like and what building those kids that it's picking up are going to. If all of the kids on the route on Rockland Road are kids that are now going to be going to the Manor School building, that route may not look like what it looks like right now, bringing the Roscoe kids. So,
Yeah, I mean, and you throw in what he said about the vehicle size, I thought, you know, for me, that was an interesting point, that
yeah, using more smaller vans, it's a lot faster to do, you know, the outskirts of Blue Beach and East Branch than it is to send a 66 passenger bus, you know, lumbering down small back roads to get to all of those kids.
So I think, Lily, I shared that really just so that you can see all of the complexities and nuances around that are difficult to try to project today for essentially 2 years from now, 1.5 years from now.
The other piece is you have 2 kids in the same house. One is now going to an elementary school and one is going to a high school. Those 2 kids are now going to have a different length bus ride because they're going different places. They're, you know, so there's a lot of different factors. Because we did kind of try and push Nick and Phil into giving us more concrete stuff, and the more stuff we threw out, the more things that they kind of, you know, kind of shot back at us as, well, you're not really taking this into account, you're not taking that into account, and they were very focused on establish the rules, establish the parameters, and we will build whatever we need to build, sorry, around those parameters.
Yeah, I mean, I had in that orange folder over here on the table, I have all of the actual bus route lists with kid by kid by kid, and, you know, one thing that comes to mind too, you would actually have to try to do that, you'd have to project forward the grade that they're in now, where will they be in 23, 24, and, you know, factor all of that in. It's very complicated, very fast, and really hard to do. And again, I understand the desire to have that. Absolutely. You still have to be done at that point. Yeah, sure.
Before we vote on the merger, will we know when the schools are going to be starting at the same time, and will we also know? Exactly, that's a very big point. You know, we're starting at the same time, we have all the kids, the busing, picking up the kids, whether they're high school, elementary, whatever, they're all getting on the same bus. And whichever direction they're coming, so if they're coming from Morgan Hill, you know, Colchester, coming this way, they drop off the elementary, and keep going and go to Lindsay Manor, drop off the high school. But, you know, same thing, if you're coming from Manor, you're drop off the high school, they drop off the elementary. So are we starting at the same time, or will we make two different bus runs? I mean, I think that would be very important prior to the vote, knowing that, what we do different bus.
I think you would have a general idea of that, and I'm gonna look over at John because, okay.
So one of the honest answer is, right now, the contracts in the districts are structured slightly differently when it talks about length of workday and start of workday. Some of them reference a actual start time, some of them reference length of day. So that's one of those things that would have to be, if the new district was formed, negotiated and worked out with the new union, because they're taking two different existing labor contracts that have different language and trying to combine them into one.
I think just logistically at a very high level, it would be very unusual and difficult to say the Manor building starts at 7:50 and the Roscoe building starts at 7:50. It would be unlikely that they would start at the same time.
In talking with Nick and Phil in what the districts around the county do, they either have the two-tiered system where one starts an hour.
That are very different, yeah.
Or the single tier where there's a 15 or 20-minute difference between the starts, because those
Gotta get-
buses that are picking up both kids have to stop at one building and go to the other. So my assumption, and you know, we assume sometimes it's wrong, but the language in the contracts are flexible enough in that single tiered with a 15-20-minute difference in start time could probably be accommodated. But again, that is something that will not be able to be absolutely solidified until a merger occurs and a new contract is agreed on. And in your experiences with other mergers, what have you seen in a situation like this where they don't line up? Or don't have the same stars?
Usually not, yeah, usually not. It's just logistically not possible to have the exact same start. For, you know, largely transportation reasons, but yeah. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15, not a lot, not like it would be if it were a two-tier busing system. Not identical. Anybody else? Audience or committee? Okay, then committee. Remembering what I asked you to think about earlier, do you feel like your questions are answered at this point? Do you feel like you want another meeting before July 25th? Or are you ready for us to come back As Alan said, we will do a little bit of additional work on the administrative staffing piece. And we'll have that, right, that's your plan ready on July 25th, unless committee wants to meet again. So committee, this was all you. What's your pleasure? Do you want another meeting? Okay, I'm seeing heads shaking. Okay, shaking, essentially shaking, no. Okay, yeah. With that, and I'm seeing a majority of the motion, shaking no or not available. Then if you have any questions or as you digest this more and more, you talk to people, certainly please reach out to Alan and I. Or John, and he can look forward questions to us as well, but give us those questions. We'll be working over the next month on getting this written, or less than a month, but so that we have it out to you timely, so that we give you a chance to look at it and, you know, kind of flag anything you want to know about it, anything you got wrong, or any of those things. Typically, there's not a lot of changes in the draft report. We've gotten good information from all of you through this process. So typically, we don't have massive changes to make once we get to that point. So, Ellen, anything else we need to cover? Okay, thank you all for your patience and your support and your participation in this very long meeting. Thank you all in the audience for coming and hanging out with us.
Thanks for the next meeting.
Yeah, sorry, 6 p.m. Mr.
Um, any,
Yeah.
no questions from any webinar?
Oh, big one. All right, John, is there anything, did you want to make comments?
Yeah, so our communication service is trying to help us, you know, gather feedback and get information. And they've set up 2 focus groups, for anybody that is interested, you know, three focus groups, 2 in person and 1 virtual. One will be at Roscoe, one will be at Livingston Manor. Marlon in the district office here and Jane in the district office in Livingston Manor have information about how to sign up for those. So if anybody in the room is interested in having a conversation with the communication folks, just to get, you know, feedback, concerns, you know, anything relating to the merger, down on paper for them to kind of process and put together. Or if there are folks in the community that you think would participate, please encourage them to reach out to Jane or Marlon, just so, you know, we have as much information about questions, concerns, you know, all of that kind of stuff to funnel into this process.
And if somebody's not talking about the school, there is also a link to a Google form to sign up for them as well. We are looking for responses by the 1st, just so we know how many people are to be there. If they, you know, walking to our welcome, but we're looking to get an idea how many people are actually going to show up to talk to us. So we would appreciate any RSVPs, and if people come up to you with questions about it, there's a let them know about the forums. They're going to be the 19th. Is a virtual, I believe, in the 21st, 1 in the morning, 1 in the evening. I think it's on the website. I don't have
Yeah, correctly. It's more of a one-on-one sit down with an individual, not a group.
Well, two on one. Yeah, so, but it's definitely more than all these people.
Less intimidating than talking in front of 45.
Much better, you know.
Okay, committee, thank you. Next meeting is Monday, July 25th, 6 p.m. Next.
Athletes. We're back.
Oh. And we're in Livingston Manor.
Oh,